My appendix burst at 2 in the morning. I called my parents 15 times from the emergency room floor, barely clinging to consciousness. My mother finally texted back, telling me to stop being dramatic because my sister's promotion celebration was tomorrow, and they could not leave. My heart stopped on the operating table 2 hours later. When I finally woke up in the intensive care unit, the surgeon stood over me with a grim expression and said, "A woman claiming to be my mother just tried to have me discharged against medical advice. But the man who paid my entire $150,000 hospital bill stepped in. My name is Tessa, and I am 32 years old. As a successful risk assessment consultant for one of Atlanta's top financial firms, I spent my entire adult life being the invisible bankroll for my family's facade of black corporate excellence. They had no idea that the stranger who saved my life was the very billionaire my brother-in-law was currently trying to defraud. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to sever ties with toxic blood relatives to save your own life. You are going to want to hear exactly how I burned their counterfeit empire to the ground. The betrayal did not start in the hospital, but the physical destruction of my body certainly mirrored what they had been doing to my soul for years. It was a Tuesday night, or rather early Wednesday morning. Outside my luxury downtown apartment, the Atlanta city lights flickered through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I had just wrapped up a grueling 90-hour work week, finalizing a massive risk analysis report. The digital clock on my kitchen island glowed a harsh green, 2 in the morning. I closed my laptop, massaging my stiff neck, desperate for just a few hours of sleep before my morning meetings. That was when the pain hit. It did not start as a gradual ache. It was a sudden, violent explosion in my lower right abdomen. It felt like a jagged piece of burning metal had been driven directly into my gut and twisted without mercy. I gasped, the air completely knocked out of my lungs. My vision instantly blurred, black spots dancing furiously at the edges of my sight. I tried to grab the edge of the marble kitchen counter to steady myself, but my legs completely gave out. I collapsed, my knees slamming hard against the hardwood floor. The agony was blinding, unlike anything I had ever experienced or could even imagine. Hot waves of nausea washed over me, leaving me drenched in a cold, clammy sweat. I curled into a tight ball on the floor, clutching my stomach, trying to draw a breath, but every inhalation felt like inhaling shattered glass. I knew instantly this was a catastrophic medical emergency. I was entirely alone, and my body was rapidly shutting down. With fingers that trembled violently, I dragged myself across the cold floor toward my handbag. Every inch moved was a fresh wave of torture. I fumbled for my phone and dialed emergency services. My voice was nothing but a ragged, strained whisper as I managed to give the dispatcher my address before the phone slipped from my sweaty palm. The operator told me to hold on, promising that an ambulance was already dispatched. The next 20 minutes were a terrifying blur of agony and fading consciousness. I vaguely remember the sound of heavy boots pounding down my hallway, my front door being forced open, and the harsh, bright beams of paramedic flashlights cutting through the darkness of my apartment. Urgent voices shouted medical terms above me. They hoisted me onto a stretcher, and the movement sent lightning bolts of pain through my entire torso. The ambulance ride was a kaleidoscope of sheer terror and wailing sirens. The paramedic hovering over me barked out my rapidly dropping blood pressure readings into his radio. When we finally crashed through the doors of the emergency room, the sterile, blinding lights of the hospital ceiling rushed past my eyes in a dizzying sequence. Nurses swarmed the gurney, transferring me to a hospital bed with chaotic efficiency. An emergency room doctor pressed his gloved hands against my abdomen. I screamed out loud, unable to contain the agony. He looked at the trauma nurse with a grim, urgent expression. "Her appendix has ruptured," he declared, his voice cutting sharply through the noisy room. "She is going into septic shock, and the infection is flooding her abdominal cavity. We need to get her into surgery right this second, or we are going to lose her." My heart hammered frantically against my ribs. I was 32 years old. I had spent my entire life working, saving, and providing for people who took me for granted. I could not die like this, completely alone on a cold hospital bed. A triage nurse leaned over me, her eyes tight with worry. "We need to contact your family immediately," she said, her voice firm but compassionate. We need an emergency contact on file, and someone needs to be here for surgical consent and post-operative care. Who can we call? My phone, I gasped out, pointing a trembling finger toward the plastic belongings bag they had placed at the foot of the bed. Ed, please, call my mother, Vivian, call my father, Jerome. The nurse handed me the device. My hands were slick with sweat, making it nearly impossible to unlock the screen. I dialed my mother's number. Vivian was a woman obsessed with appearances, someone who lived for her country club luncheons and high society galas. But surely knowing her eldest daughter was facing emergency surgery, she would drop everything. The phone rang. It rang until it went straight to voicemail. I swallowed a dry sob and dialed again. Voicemail. I dialed my father, Jerome. He was a passive man who always bowed to my mother's demands, but he was still my father. The call went to voicemail after 4 rings. The pain intensified, clouding my thoughts. The monitors beside my bed began to screech, signaling that my vitals were crashing faster than the doctors could stabilize them. Nurses pushed intravenous lines into my arms, pumping me full of broad-spectrum antibiotics and potent painkillers that did absolutely nothing to dull the agonizing fire in my gut. I called my mother again. I called my father again. I dialed my sister Simone. I dialed my brother-in-law DeAndre. 15 times. I made 15 desperate calls from that emergency room bed surrounded by strangers fighting to keep me alive. 15 times I listened to the ringing echo in my ear, praying for just one person in my bloodline to pick up the phone. Nobody answered. On the 16th attempt, I could no longer hold the phone to my ear. I opened my messages and typed out a frantic, messy plea to my mother. In the ER, appendix burst, sepsis, going into emergency surgery right now. I am dying. Please come, please. I stared at the glowing screen, my vision tunneling into a narrow, dark circle. I watched, waiting for the typing indicator to appear. 1 minute passed, then 2. The surgeon returned, yelling at the nurses to prep the surgical suite immediately because my organs were beginning to fail. Then my phone buzzed in my hand, a text message from Vivian. I forced my heavy eyelids open, expecting a frantic reply. I expected her to ask for the hospital address. I expected the absolute bare minimum of parental panic and love. Instead, the words on the screen delivered a fatal blow to whatever remaining affection I held for my family. Your sister's promotion celebration is tomorrow. Simone just made public relations director, and DeAndre booked the main ballroom at the Grand Hotel. We are extremely busy preparing the VIP gift bags and coordinating with the caterers. We cannot leave right now. Stop being dramatic and handle this yourself. We will call you on Monday. Stop being dramatic. I stared at those 3 words as the phone slipped from my numb fingers. My appendix had violently ruptured. Sepsis was actively poisoning my bloodstream. I was moments away from being cut open on a surgical table, and my mother was annoyed that my near-death experience was interrupting her gift bag preparation for my sister's vanity party. A profound freezing emptiness washed over me, entirely separate from the septic shock ravaging my body. It was the crushing weight of absolute realization. I was nothing to them. I was never a daughter, a sister, or a human being. I was just an open wallet. The sheer cruelty of the timing was sickening. Just 3 days ago, Vivian had shown up at my office building, crying hysterical, manipulative tears. She claimed DeAndre was in terrible financial trouble. He desperately needed to secure a luxury venue for a networking gala that would supposedly launch his new tech startup. He was exactly $50,000 short. Vivian had bullied, guilted, and berated me right there in the lobby of my firm. She called me a selfish, bitter spinster who was hoarding my corporate salary while my family struggled. She accused me of being jealous of Simone's happy marriage. Exhausted, beaten down by decades of emotional extortion, and desperate to get her to leave before she caused a scene in front of my colleagues, I had transferred $50,000 directly into DeAndre's account. It was a massive portion of my hard-earned savings. I had literally handed them $50,000 to fund their fraudulent, flashy lifestyle, and 72 hours later, they refused to pick up the phone to save my life. The nurses unlocked the brakes on my bed and began wheeling me frantically down the bright white corridor toward the surgical wing. The fluorescent lights overhead strobed past my eyes, keeping pace with my erratic, failing heartbeat. "You hang in there, Tessa," the trauma nurse said softly, jogging alongside my bed and grasping my hand tightly. "We have got you. You are not alone." I looked at her. A complete stranger was holding my hand, offering me more warmth and humanity in 5 seconds than my own mother had offered me in 32 years. Hot, bitter tears spilled over my eyelashes, mixing with the cold sweat on my face. "They are not coming," I whispered, my voice breaking into a quiet sob. "They do not care." We crashed through the double doors of the operating room. The surgical team was already scrubbed in, waiting under the massive, glaring surgical lamps. They shifted my trembling body onto the freezing steel operating table. My entire abdominal cavity felt like it was submerged in boiling acid. An anesthesiologist positioned himself behind my head, placing a clear plastic mask securely over my nose and mouth. "I need you to take deep, slow breaths, Tessa," he instructed gently. "I am going to ask you to count backward from 10. 10. I thought about the $50,000 sitting in DeAndre's bank account. 9. I thought about Simone posing for cameras while I bled internally. 8. I thought about Vivian typing the words "stop being dramatic" while my organs failed. 7. I realized with absolute crystal clarity that my entire existence had been spent bleeding myself dry to nourish a family of parasites. The heavy dark velvet of the anesthesia flooded my veins, pulling me downward into a thick, suffocating void. The excruciating pain in my stomach finally began to recede, replaced by a terrifying numbness. But just as the darkness completely swallowed my consciousness, something went catastrophically wrong. The rhythmic, rapid beeping of the heart monitor next to my ear suddenly spiked. It morphed into a frantic, chaotic screech. "She is crashing. Her blood pressure is bottoming out. We are losing her." The panicked shouts of the surgical team sounded muffled, as if I were listening to them from the bottom of a deep ocean. I felt an immense crushing pressure on my chest. I heard the desperate clatter of surgical instruments and the urgent command for a defibrillator. And then the frantic screech of the monitor flattened out entirely. It turned into a single continuous high-pitched tone that pierced through the operating room. A flat line. My heart stopped beating. The betrayal, the extortion, the desperate need for my mother's love, it all vanished. I was 32 years old, and I died on that cold operating table, abandoned by the very people whose empire I had built. As the doctors fought frantically to pull me back from the brink of death, charging the paddles to shock my chest, the reality of my existence was sealed in that sterile room. I did not know it yet, but the woman who died on that table would not be the same woman who woke up. The Tessa who constantly sought validation from a toxic bloodline was gone forever. The flatline was not just the end of my heartbeat. It was the absolute, irreversible death of my loyalty to my family. When I returned to the world of the living, there would be no more second chances, no more forced apologies, and no more $50,000 bailouts. There would only be a cold, calculated reckoning, and I was going to ensure they lost everything. The return to the world of the living was not peaceful. It felt like being dragged violently backward through a tunnel of crushing pressure and blinding light. My chest burned with a deep, bruised ache, a physical reminder of the defibrillator paddles that had shocked my heart back into a steady rhythm. I tried to swallow, but my throat was painfully dry, scratched raw from this intubation tube that had kept me breathing while I hovered on the edge of death. I forced my eyes open. The harsh, glaring lights of the operating room were gone. Instead, I found myself staring up at a muted, sophisticated ceiling with recessed ambient lighting. The air smelled crisp and clean, lacking that heavy metallic stench of standard hospital wards. I slowly turned my head, wincing as the surgical staples in my abdomen pulled tight. The room I was in made absolutely no sense. It was massive, easily the size of a luxury hotel suite. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic, unobstructed view of the Atlanta skyline, bathed in the early morning sunlight. The furniture was sleek mahogany, and a private sitting area featured plush leather sofas. I looked down at my arms. Intravenous lines were neatly secured, feeding fluids and heavy painkillers into my veins, connected to state-of-the-art monitors that hummed softly in the background. I worked as a risk assessment consultant. I knew numbers and I knew corporate insurance policies. The premium health insurance provided by my firm was excellent, but it absolutely did not cover a penthouse-level private intensive care suite like this. This room cost thousands of dollars a night out of pocket. Panic flared in my chest. Had the hospital made a mistake? Was I going to be buried in medical debt on top of the physical trauma? Before I could attempt to hit the call button, the heavy wooden door to my suite swung open. A tall, gray-haired surgeon walked in, followed closely by a senior trauma nurse. The surgeon wore a crisp white coat over his scrubs, and his name badge identified him as the chief of surgery. But it was his expression that caught my immediate attention. He did not look relieved or reassuring. He looked absolutely fiercely enraged. He approached the side of my bed, checking the monitors before looking down at me. His jaw was clenched so tight a muscle ticked in his cheek. "You are a very lucky woman, Tessa," he said, his voice low and tight with suppressed anger. "We lost you on the table for 2 full minutes. The sepsis was aggressive and the rupture was severe. We had to perform a full abdominal washout. You are going to be recovering here for a while." I tried to speak, but my voice was a raspy, broken croak. "Thank you," I managed to whisper. "But why am I in this room? My insurance will not cover a private suite." The surgeon let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "Your insurance is the least of your concerns right now. The reason I am standing here vibrating with anger has nothing to do with your surgical complications. It has everything to do with what happened in the main lobby of this hospital exactly 3 hours ago." I stared at him, my heart rate picking up on the monitor beside me. The rhythmic beeping accelerated. The nurse stepped forward and gently placed a hand on my shoulder, trying to steady my racing pulse. At 6 o'clock this morning, the surgeon continued, his eyes locking onto mine with intense severity. "A woman identifying herself as your mother stormed into our emergency triage center." My breath caught in my throat. Vivian, she had come. Despite the cold text message, despite the promotion party preparations, she had actually come to the hospital. A tiny, pathetic, conditioned part of my brain flared with a brief spark of hope. Maybe she had realized the gravity of the situation. Maybe she actually cared that her eldest daughter had flatlined. That spark was extinguished before it could even fully form. "She did not come to the surgical floor to check on your condition," the surgeon said, his words dropping like heavy stones onto my chest. "She did not ask if you survived the operation. She did not ask the nursing staff about your prognosis, your pain levels, or your recovery time. Instead, she marched directly to the discharge desk and demanded that you be released immediately against all medical advice." The confusion must have been obvious on my face because the surgeon leaned in closer, his expression a mix of professional disgust and profound disbelief. "She brought a notary public and a representative from a private wealth bank with her," he explained, his voice growing sharper. "Your mother stood in the lobby of my hospital screaming at my administrative staff. She claimed you were faking the severity of your illness. She demanded we wake you up from post-surgical sedation, dress you, and wheel you down to the lobby. She said she needed you to physically sign a guarantor document by 8 o'clock this morning." I felt the blood drain entirely from my face. The room spun. The heavy painkillers pumping through my veins were no match for the visceral, sickening shock of what he was telling me. "A guarantor document." I whispered, the puzzle pieces clicking together in my risk analyst brain with horrifying clarity. "Yes," the surgeon confirmed. "She told the head nurse that your sister Simone and her husband DeAndre were closing on a $2 million property today. They apparently needed your signature and your credit profile to secure the mortgage. Your mother was furious. She actually threatened to sue this hospital for holding you hostage because, according to her, you were deliberately trying to ruin your sister's happiness by refusing to sign the bank papers." I closed my eyes. The sheer, unadulterated evil of it was paralyzing. I had flatlined. I had clinically died. My chest had been shocked with electricity to force my heart to beat again. I had been sliced open, my infected organs removed, my body washed of toxic bacteria. And while I lay unconscious, fighting for every single breath, my mother was in the lobby with a bank representative, trying to rip the intravenous lines out of my arms so I could secure a $2 million mortgage for the brother-in-law who had just extorted $50,000 from me 3 days ago. They did not view me as a human being. I was a financial instrument, an asset to be liquidated for their benefit, even if it meant dragging my bleeding, sedated body out of a hospital bed. "I am so sorry, Tessa," the nurse said softly, her eyes shining with unshed tears of pure sympathy. "I have worked in trauma for 20 years. and I have never seen a family member act with such blatant disregard for human life. We refused her demands, of course. We told her you had just been resuscitated. Do you know what she said? I opened my eyes, staring blankly at the ceiling. Tell me. She said you were young and strong and you could sleep it off after you signed the papers at the bank, the nurse replied, her voice shaking with quiet outrage. She tried to physically push past the security desk to get to the elevators. She was going to come up to the intensive care unit and force you awake. A cold, dark fury began to pool in my stomach. It was a new sensation entirely different from the desperate people-pleasing anxiety that had governed my entire life. This was the quiet, dangerous calm of a woman who had absolutely nothing left to lose. How did you stop her? I asked, my voice steadying, growing colder by the second. Did you call the police? The surgeon shook his head, crossing his arms over his chest. We were dialing security, but we did not have to intervene. Someone else did. I frowned, my brow furrowing in confusion. Someone else? Who? A man, the surgeon said, his tone shifting from anger to profound awe. A man stepped out of the executive elevator bank. He was flanked by 3 men in dark suits who looked like private military contractors. He walked directly up to your mother in the middle of her screaming match. I do not know who this man is to you, Tessa, but he wields a terrifying amount of power. My heart raced. I had no partner, no wealthy friends, and certainly no private military contacts. What did he do? I asked. He looked at your mother and told her that if she took one more step toward the surgical elevators, he would personally ensure she spent the rest of her natural life in a federal penitentiary, the surgeon explained. Your mother tried to argue, tried to play the concerned parent angle. The man simply snapped his fingers. His security team physically lifted your mother by her arms and dragged her out of the hospital through the sliding glass doors. The bank representative ran away in terror. I lay there completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the story. But how am I in this room? I asked, gesturing to the luxurious suite. Who authorized this? The same man, the surgeon replied, pulling a thick medical chart from the foot of my bed. After your mother was thrown out, this man walked directly into the hospital administration office. He demanded the absolute highest level of care available for you. The administrator told him that your insurance would not cover the executive recovery wing. The surgeon paused, looking at me with an expression of absolute bewilderment. Tessa, this man pulled a solid black titanium card from his jacket pocket. He paid your entire hospital bill up front. The surgery, the emergency room fees, the medications, and a 2-week stay in this exact executive suite. He dropped $150,000 in a single transaction without blinking an eye. He told the hospital director that you were the most valuable asset in the city, and your life was to be protected at all costs. My breath caught. $150,000, paid in full, by a complete stranger. Who is he? I demanded, trying to sit up, but the sharp pain in my abdomen forced me back down. Did he leave a name? He did not just leave a name, the nurse said, stepping forward and pointing toward the heavy wooden door of my suite. He left a security detail. I followed her gaze. Through the small glass window of my hospital room door, I could clearly see the broad, muscular backs of 2 men in tailored black suits standing guard in the hallway. They were positioned perfectly, blocking anyone from even approaching my room. He placed private security at your door. The surgeon confirmed, his voice hushed. He gave strict orders to the hospital administration. No visitors are allowed. No phone calls are to be put through to this room. If anyone matching your mother, father, sister, or brother-in-law's description attempts to enter this building, they are to be arrested for criminal trespassing immediately. My mind was spinning violently. A billionaire stranger had just swooped in, banished my abusive parasitic family, paid a staggering medical bill, and stationed private guards at my door. It sounded like something out of a corporate espionage thriller. Before I could ask another question, the heavy wooden door swung open. The 2 security guards outside immediately stepped back, standing at rigid attention, making way for the person entering. The air in the room seemed to freeze. The surgeon and the nurse immediately stepped back, their postures respectful and slightly intimidated. A man walked into my room. He was impeccably dressed in a bespoke navy blue suit that radiated wealth and authority. He looked to be in his early 40s, with sharp, striking features, piercing dark eyes, and an aura of absolute, uncompromising power. He did not look like a savior. He looked like a predator who had just found exactly what he was hunting for. He stopped at the foot of my bed, his dark eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my breath hitch. "You have a very persistent, very annoying family, Tessa," he said, his voice a smooth, deep baritone that commanded the entire room. "But do not worry, they will not be bothering you anymore. We have much more important business to discuss." I stared at him, my mind racing through every client, every corporate executive I had ever analyzed in my career, trying to place his face. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "And why did you pay my medical bill?" The man offered a slow, dangerous smirk. He reached into his tailored jacket, pulled out a heavily encrypted matte black laptop, and placed it gently on the table beside my bed. "My name is Elias Thorne," he said softly, leaning over the foot of the bed, "and I paid your bill because you and I, Tessa, have a mutual parasite to exterminate. Recover quickly. We have an empire to burn to the ground." The name echoed in the sterile quiet of my intensive care suite, striking a chord of absolute disbelief deep within my analytical mind. Elias Thorne. In the financial sector of Atlanta, and indeed across the global venture capital landscape, that name was spoken with a mixture of profound reverence and abject terror. He was not just a wealthy investor, he was a corporate apex predator. His firm, Thorne Ventures, was infamous for executing aggressive hostile takeovers and dismantling fraudulent enterprises with surgical precision. He was a phantom billionaire, a man who rarely made public appearances. Yet here he was, standing at the foot of my hospital bed in a bespoke navy suit, offering me an alliance. I stared at the matte black laptop he had just placed on my tray table. The heavy painkillers pumping through my intravenous lines made my thoughts sluggish, but the sheer shock of his presence forced my adrenaline to spike, clearing the fog from my brain. I clutched the edge of my thin hospital blanket, my knuckles turning white as I tried to process the surreal reality of the situation. Why would Elias Thorne, a man who dealt in billion-dollar acquisitions, care about a mid-level risk assessment consultant bleeding out in an emergency room? More importantly, what did he mean by a mutual parasite? Before my dry, scratchy throat could form a single coherent question, a sudden violent commotion erupted in the hallway outside my suite. The thick, soundproofed door muffled the noise, but the sheer volume of the screaming made it impossible to ignore. I recognized that shrill, hysterical pitch instantly. It was Vivian, my mother. "Let me go right now, you oversized thugs!" Vivian's voice pierced through the heavy oak door, dripping with entitled outrage. "That is my daughter in there. I have legal rights. I demand you step aside before I have you all arrested for assault. I need her signature right now." Another voice joined the fray, louder, posturing with fake masculine authority. It was DeAndre. "You heard her. Get out of the way. We have a bank executive waiting downstairs, and we are not losing a $2 million closing because of a stomachache. Move." My heart rate monitor began to ping rapidly. They had not given up. Even after being thrown out of the hospital lobby, even after being told I had flatlined and nearly died, they had sneaked back into the building. They had navigated past the triage nurses, bypassed the visitor desk, and hunted me down in the surgical recovery wing. They did not care if I was hooked up to life support machines. They only cared about securing the funding for their lavish, fraudulent lifestyle. I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. My instincts, honed by a lifetime of emotional conditioning, screamed at me to appease them, to fix the situation, to sign whatever they wanted, just to make the screaming stop. But as I instinctively tried to push myself up from the mattress, a sharp, white-hot agony tore through my freshly stapled abdomen. I gasped, falling back against the pillows. Elias Thorne did not even flinch. He did not turn around. He did not rush to the door. He stood perfectly still at the foot of my bed, his dark eyes locked onto mine, watching my reaction with intense, calculated calmness. He slipped his hands into the pockets of his trousers, projecting an aura of absolute, immovable dominance. "Relax," Tessa, Elias commanded, his smooth, deep voice slicing effortlessly through the panic rising in my chest. "You are safe here. They will not breach that door." Right on cue, the muffled sounds of a physical altercation echoed from the hallway. I heard a heavy thud against the wall, followed by a sharp gasp from DeAndre. The deep, authoritative voices of the two private security guards Elias had stationed outside rumbled through the corridor. There was no shouting from the guards, only the terrifying, efficient sound of highly trained professionals neutralizing a threat. "Get your hands off my husband," Simone shrieked from somewhere down the hall. "I am recording this. You are going to jail." "I am afraid you are mistaken, ma'am." One of the security guards replied, his voice deadpan and professional. "You are trespassing in a restricted medical wing. You have exactly 10 seconds to walk toward the freight elevator voluntarily, or I will break your husband's wrist and carry him there myself." The scuffling ceased immediately. A tense, suffocating silence fell over the hallway, broken only by Vivian's frantic, heavy breathing. "You cannot do this," Vivian cried out, her voice cracking with desperate, manipulative tears. "She is my blood. She owes me. You cannot keep a mother from her child." Elias slowly turned his head toward the door, a look of profound disgust crossing his sharp features. He took a sleek smartphone from his inner pocket, tapped a single button, and lifted it to his mouth. "Remove the garbage from my floor." Elias spoke into the device, his tone chillingly calm. "If they resist, press charges for criminal trespassing and assault. Do not let them back onto the hospital premises." "Yes, sir," a voice crackled back through the phone speaker. Footsteps retreated quickly down the corridor, accompanied by the fading, indignant protests of my family. Within seconds, the hallway returned to absolute sterile silence. The threat was gone, neutralized with the simple push of a button by a man I had never met before today. I lay in my hospital bed, staring at Elias Thorne with wide, bewildered eyes. The power he wielded was intoxicating and terrifying all at once. He had effortlessly swatted away the monsters that had terrorized my entire existence. "I do not understand," I whispered, my voice shaking with a mixture of physical pain and emotional shock. "You are Elias Thorne. You run Thorne Ventures. You buy and sell international conglomerates. Why are you here in a hospital room dealing with my pathetic family? Why did you pay a $150,000 medical bill for a risk analyst you do not even know?" Elias slowly walked around to the side of my bed. He reached out and adjusted the angle of the laptop he had placed on my tray table, ensuring it was squarely within my reach. His movements were deliberate, unhurried, projecting a man who controlled every variable in his environment. He looked down at me, his dark eyes stripping away the corporate armor I usually wore. "I do not do charity," Tessa Elias stated flatly, his voice devoid of any sentimental warmth. "I do not care about your family drama, and I certainly do not swoop in to save damsels in distress. I am a businessman. I make investments, and I protect my assets. Right now, you are the most valuable asset I have in Atlanta." My brow furrowed. "An asset? How can I be an asset to you? I am just a consultant. We have never even crossed paths." Elias leaned in closer, resting his strong hands on the metal guardrail of my hospital bed. His proximity was overwhelming, smelling of expensive cologne and crisp winter air. "We have not met officially," he agreed softly, "but we have been engaged in a very high-stakes game of chess for the past 3 months. You see, my firm was on the verge of acquiring a highly lucrative emerging technology startup. The founders presented immaculate financial projections, flawless pitch decks, and a revolutionary product line. My board of directors was ready to greenlight a $50 million initial funding round. I listened intently, my analytical mind automatically tracking the corporate terminology despite my exhaustion. But 3 months ago, Elias continued, a highly classified, heavily encrypted dossier was delivered directly to my private email server. The sender used a secure, untraceable routing network. The dossier contained a forensic teardown of the startup's financial architecture. It exposed a brilliant, deeply hidden $5 million deficit. The company was not a tech startup at all. It was an elaborate, sophisticated Ponzi scheme designed to drain my venture capital funds and disappear. My breath hitched. My heart rate monitor beeped faster as a chilling realization began to dawn on me. The analysis in that dossier was flawless. Elias said, his eyes narrowing with intense respect. It was the work of a genius. It took my own internal auditing team 3 weeks to verify the claims made by this anonymous whistleblower. The whistleblower saved my firm, a catastrophic $50 million loss, and protected our reputation from a devastating public relations nightmare. I swallowed hard, the scratchiness in my throat burning. I spent vast resources tracking the digital footprint of that dossier. Elias revealed his gaze never leaving mine. I employ the best cybersecurity experts on the planet. It took them 2 months to crack the encryption and trace the source IP address back to a risk assessment consultant working late nights in a downtown Atlanta apartment. I stared at him, paralyzed by the magnitude of his revelation. Elias straightened up, buttoning his suit jacket with a sharp, decisive movement. I came to your office building 3 days ago to offer you a position as the Senior Director of Risk Management at Thorn Ventures. But when I arrived, my security team intercepted a very interesting scene in the lobby. We watched a woman demanding $50,000 from you. We watched you transfer the funds under extreme emotional duress. My face flushed hot with deep, unbearable shame. He had seen me at my weakest. He had watched Vivian extort me in public. I ran a background check on the account you transferred that money to. Elias continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous, lethal register. Do you know whose account that was, Tessa? DeAndre, I whispered the name, tasting like ash in my mouth. My brother-in-law. Elias nodded slowly. Yes, DeAndre. The very same man who happens to be the lead founder of the fraudulent tech startup that tried to rob my firm of $50 million. The room spun. The walls felt like they were closing in on me. DeAndre was the fraudster. The money Vivian had begged me for, the $50,000 she claimed was for a venue deposit, was actually tied to a massive corporate scam targeting Elias Thorne. My family was not just toxic. They were active, high-level criminals, and they were using me to fund their illegal enterprise. They are using you as a shield, Tessa, Elias stated coldly. DeAndre is drowning in debt from his failed scam. He needs capital to stay out of federal prison, and your family is bleeding you dry to keep him afloat. That $2 million mansion they are trying to force you to sign for today. It is a shell property. A desperate attempt to launder money and secure a line of credit before my legal team destroys him. Tears of pure, unadulterated rage filled my eyes. They had left me to die in a hospital corridor so they could complete a real estate transaction to cover up a multi-million-dollar fraud. They had sold my life for DeAndre's fake empire. I stepped in and paid your hospital bill because you protected my empire, Elias said, stepping away from the bed. Now, I am going to give you the resources to protect yours. He pointed a commanding finger at the secure black laptop resting on my tray table. That machine is loaded with military-grade encryption software, direct access to the dark web, and a direct line to my personal forensic accounting team, Elias instructed. I bought you the best medical care money can buy. I built a fortress around this room. You have 48 hours to heal your physical wounds. He walked toward the heavy oak door, pausing with his hand on the brass handle. He looked back at me, the faint shadow of a ruthless smile playing on his lips. When you are ready to stop being the victim and start being the executioner, open that laptop, Elias declared. Recover quickly, Tessa. We have a mutual parasite to exterminate. With that, the billionaire vanished into the hallway, the heavy door clicking shut behind him, leaving me alone with the machine that would help me burn my family to the ground. The heavy oak door clicked shut, sealing me inside the sterile luxury of the executive intensive care suite. I was entirely alone with the matte black laptop resting on my tray table. The sleek machine felt heavier than it looked, a digital weapon loaded with everything I needed to dismantle the parasites who shared my bloodline. I spent the remainder of that first day drifting between the agonizing pain of my stapled abdomen and the sharp, cold clarity of my new reality. I did not open the laptop immediately. I needed my mind to be perfectly sharp, free from the heavy fog of intravenous painkillers. I pressed the button to reduce my medication drip, enduring the searing physical fire in my gut, so my brain could function at full capacity. I watched the city lights of Atlanta flicker through the floor-to-ceiling windows, planning every single move of my retaliation. By the morning of the second day, I was sitting upright against the plush pillows. The medical monitors hummed a steady, reassuring rhythm. The two private security guards Elias Thorne had stationed outside my room operated with strict military precision. I watched them through the small glass window of my door. They were unmovable mountains of muscle in dark suits, intercepting nurses and doctors to verify their identities before allowing anyone near my room. But human error is a universal constant even in elite security details. It happened at exactly 7 in the morning during the hospital shift change. For a brief window of maybe 90 seconds, the night shift guards stepped toward the elevator bank to brief their daytime replacements on the security protocol. The corridor outside my suite was momentarily unguarded. That 90-second window was all my family needed. The heavy wooden door to my suite flew open with a violent echoing crash slamming hard against the rubber wall stopper. My heart rate monitor spiked instantly, emitting a sharp, frantic warning beep that pierced the quiet room. I flinched, my hands instinctively flying down to protect my fresh surgical incision. There were no sympathetic smiles. There were no bouquets of flowers. There were no brightly colored balloons wishing me a speedy recovery. Instead, a storm of tailored suits and suffocating designer perfume invaded my sanctuary. Vivian marched into the room first, her heels clicking aggressively against the polished hardwood floor. She wore a sharp crimson blazer, her hair styled to absolute perfection for Simone's promotion gala later that evening. Close behind her was my sister Simone, clutching a designer handbag paid for by my extracted savings. Then came DeAndre, looking arrogant in a custom-tailored suit that hid the desperate cornered fraudster underneath. Finally, my father Jerome shuffled in last, carefully closing the heavy door behind them and refusing to meet my eyes. Vivian did not ask how I was feeling. She did not look at the intravenous lines snaking into my arms or the pale, sickly color of my skin. She marched directly to the side of my hospital bed, her eyes blazing with an irrational manic fury that I had seen 1,000 times before. She reached into her oversized designer tote bag, pulled out a thick, heavy stack of legal banking documents, and threw them violently onto my lap. The thick manila folder landed squarely on my freshly stapled stomach. A white-hot flash of pure agony ripped through my core, radiating outward from the wound. I gasped, biting down hard on my lower lip, until I tasted copper, refusing to give her the satisfaction of hearing me scream in pain. My breath hitched in my throat as I fought to remain conscious through the sudden spike in torment. "You have dragged out this pathetic performance long enough, Tessa." Vivian hissed, her voice a venomous whisper, designed to avoid alerting the nurses working outside. "I had to bribe a janitor to let us up the service elevator because of whatever stunt you pulled with security downstairs yesterday. We are out of time. The bank closes the mortgage portal at noon today." I stared at the thick stack of papers resting heavily on my battered body. I looked up at the woman who had given birth to me, feeling absolutely nothing but cold contempt. "You left me to die," I said, my voice hoarse but completely steady. "I flatlined on an operating table while you packed gift bags." Vivian rolled her eyes, waving a perfectly manicured hand in the air as if swatting away a minor, insignificant annoyance. "Oh, please. You are sitting up. You are talking. You are clearly fine. The doctors always exaggerate to inflate the medical bill. I knew you were faking the severity of this little stomach ache just to sabotage your sister's happiness. You have always been jealous of Simone. You could not stand the thought of her and DeAndre closing on a $2 million mansion on the exact same day she gets promoted to public relations director." I shifted my gaze to my father. He stood near the window, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, staring blankly at the Atlanta skyline, just like he always did when things got difficult. "Dad," I croaked, the emotional betrayal burning hotter than the physical pain. "Are you really going to stand there and let her do this? I almost died." Jerome shifted his weight uncomfortably. He looked at the floor, then at the wall, anywhere but at me. "Your mother is right, Tessa." He mumbled, his voice devoid of any backbone. "We need to handle family business. Just sign the papers so we can all move on. Simone needs this house to solidify her new image at the firm. You know how important optics are in our corporate community." I felt a sickening twist of absolute disgust. He was just as culpable as the rest of them. His passive enabling was the toxic soil in which Vivian's cruelty had flourished for decades. Simone stepped forward, perfectly executing her role as the perpetual victim. She brought a tissue to her dry eyes, forcing a dramatic, trembling sigh. "Why do you hate me so much, Tessa?" she whimpered, deploying her trademark gaslighting tactic with practiced ease. "I have done nothing but support you. DeAndre and I are trying to build a legacy, a black empire we can all be proud of. But you are so bitter. You sit in your empty, lonely apartment slaving away as a corporate drone and you project your miserable life onto us. I looked at my sister. The sheer audacity was almost impressive. She was wearing a diamond necklace bought with my hard-earned money, standing over my hospital bed, calling me a lonely drone while begging me to legally bind myself to her fraudulent mortgage. It is incredibly selfish. Simone continued, her fake tears, vanishing instantly, replaced by a cold, calculating sneer. DeAndre is a highly successful tech entrepreneur. He is out there making moves, disrupting the industry and building real wealth. He is giving me the life I deserve. And you are trying to ruin my promotion day by playing the victim in a hospital bed. Just sign the guarantor line. Tessa, it is just a formality. DeAndre's company is bringing in millions next quarter anyway. You will not even have to pay a single dime. I looked at DeAndre, the successful tech entrepreneur who was currently being hunted by a billionaire venture capitalist for a $5 million Ponzi scheme. The man who had extorted $50,000 from me 3 days ago because he could not even afford a venue deposit. DeAndre stepped up to the edge of the bed. He was a large man towering over me, using his physical presence as a deliberate intimidation tactic. He placed his heavy hands on the mattress, leaning over me until I could smell the strong, minty scent of his expensive cologne mixed with chewing gum. The friendly, charismatic mask he wore for the public was completely gone, replaced by the desperate, cornered look of a criminal running out of options. Listen to me very carefully, Tessa. DeAndre growled, his voice a low, threatening rumble. I am not playing games with you today. My investors are waiting for the optics of this mansion purchase to clear before they release the next round of seed funding. This family needs this win. I need this win. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a sleek silver pen, clicking it aggressively before dropping it onto the manila folder resting on my lap. You are going to pick up that pen, DeAndre ordered. You are going to sign your name on every single dotted line marked for the financial guarantor. If you do not sign those papers right now, I will personally make sure your pristine little credit score is burned to ashes. I know your social security number. I know your bank routing details. I know everything about your finances, because your mother gave them to me. I will open accounts in your name. I will default on them. I will bury you in debt so fast you will never qualify for a car loan again, let alone maintain your security clearance at that fancy risk assessment firm you work for. The room fell dead silent. The threat hung heavily in the sterile air of the intensive care unit. DeAndre had just openly admitted to possessing my stolen financial identity, confirming exactly what Elias Thorne had vaguely hinted at. They were not just asking for a favor. They were holding my entire financial life hostage. Vivian crossed her arms, looking down at me with an expression of triumphant malice. You heard him, Tessa. Do not be stupid. You owe us for the life we gave you. Sign the documents and we will leave you alone to recover from your little procedure. If you refuse, we will walk out of here and let DeAndre do what he has to do. Your career will be completely over by Monday morning. I looked down at the silver pen resting on the thick stack of mortgage papers. I looked at the names printed clearly at the top of the contract. Simone and DeAndre, the proud, wealthy couple building a fake empire on the foundation of my stolen identity. The pain in my abdomen was a steady, burning reminder of the mortality they had completely disregarded. I took a slow, deep breath, feeling the surgical staples pull against my skin. I reached out my fingers, wrapping tightly around the cold metal barrel of the silver pen. Vivian's lips curled into a victorious, predatory smile. There is a good girl, she cooed patronizingly. I knew you would see reason. We have a gala to prepare for tonight, and we cannot waste any more time dealing with your tantrums. Simone clapped her hands together, a sharp, excited sound. Thank you, Tessa. I will make sure the photographer at the gala gets a good shot of me and DeAndre to send to you while you rest. We are going to look absolutely stunning tonight. DeAndre leaned back, adjusting his suit jacket, a smug, arrogant expression spreading across his face. Good choice, Tessa. I always knew you were the smart sister. It would be a shame to see a brilliant risk analyst lose her job because she suddenly became a massive financial liability. I stared at the pen in my hand. I felt the cold metal warming against my skin. I thought about the secure black laptop Elias Thorne had left on my bedside table, hidden just out of their sight. I thought about the encrypted dark web access, the forensic accounting tools, and the direct line to a billionaire's legal executioners. They thought they had cornered a frightened, lonely corporate drone. They thought they had trapped a desperate people-pleasing daughter who would do anything to keep the peace. They had no idea that they were standing in the cage with a predator who had just been handed the keys to the armory. I slowly lifted my head, meeting DeAndre's smug, arrogant gaze. I looked at Simone's gloating smile, a smile that had been handed to her on a silver platter paid for by my sweat and tears. I looked at Jerome's pathetic, cowardly posture, disgusted by the man who was supposed to protect me, but instead chose the path of least resistance. And finally, I locked eyes with Vivian, the woman who had left me to die so she could pack gift bags filled with cheap trinkets to impress people who did not even like her. The silence in the room was absolute, pregnant with the heavy expectation of my submission. They waited for me to press the pen to the paper, to sign away my future, to bleed myself dry one more time for their counterfeit royalty. I did not sign. I held the pen tightly, the metal digging into my palm, and prepared to deliver the first strike of a war they could never possibly win. I did not press the silver pen to the paper. Instead, I let it slip from my fingers. It clattered against the plastic tray table, the sound unnaturally loud in the tense, expectant silence of the room. I looked down at the thick stack of mortgage documents resting on my lap. $2 million of fraudulent debt ready to be chained to my name. I placed both hands firmly on the top and bottom edges of the manila folder. I ignored the sharp, burning protest of my surgical staples. With a sudden, violent, and deliberate motion, I ripped the entire stack of legal documents straight down the middle. The sound of tearing paper was sharp and definitive. I let the torn halves flutter down onto the pristine white hospital blankets like useless confetti. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the heavy, breathless quiet of a bomb detonating in slow motion. Simone was the first to react. Her jaw dropped, her perfectly glossed lips parting in sheer horror. She stared at the shredded papers as if I had just murdered her firstborn child. My father, Jerome, took a sudden step backward, bumping into the wall, his eyes wide with cowardice and shock. He knew exactly what kind of storm was about to break. "Have you lost your mind?" Vivian shrieked, the pristine facade of the wealthy socialite instantly shattering. She lunged forward, her hands hovering over the shredded documents as if she could magically tape a $2 million mortgage back together. "Do you have any idea what you just did? Those were original bank copies. The mortgage broker is waiting for us right now. You selfish, ungrateful, arrogant little brat." I looked at my mother, my heart beating with a steady, icy rhythm. "I am not signing anything," my voice cutting through her hysterical screaming with lethal calm. "I am not financing your fake empire. I am not paying for a mansion while I recover from nearly dying. You will not get another single dime from me, Vivian. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever again." "You owe us," Vivian roared, her face turning an ugly mottled shade of crimson. She slammed her hand down on the foot of my bed, shaking the mattress and sending a fresh wave of agony through my abdomen. "I gave you life. I fed you. I put a roof over your head. You owe this family everything you have. You are nothing without the sacrifices I made for you. We need this house for Simone. We need this image to secure DeAndre's investors. You are going to fix this right now. I do not owe you a single thing." I fired back, pushing myself up higher against the pillows, ignoring the searing pain in my gut. "I paid you back 10 times over. I paid for Simone's college tuition. I paid for the down payment on your current house. I handed over $50,000 just 3 days ago because you stood in my office lobby and cried fake tears. You did not give me life. You treated me like an automated teller machine. And when the machine finally broke down and ended up in an emergency room, you left me to die." Simone burst into loud, theatrical tears, stomping her designer heels against the floor. "You ruined everything, Tessa," she wailed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "DeAndre promised me that house. My promotion party is tonight. How am I supposed to host the entire Atlanta corporate elite, knowing my sister deliberately destroyed my husband's real estate closing? You are just a bitter, lonely woman trying to drag me down to your miserable level." DeAndre had heard enough. The veneer of the charismatic, successful tech entrepreneur completely evaporated, revealing the desperate, violent street grifter beneath the expensive suit. He let out a low, guttural snarl. He stepped around Vivian, closing the distance to the side of my bed in two long, aggressive strides. I am not playing this game with you. DeAndre growled, his eyes dark and frantic. I have millions of dollars in seed funding riding on this property acquisition. If I do not show the bank a solid guarantor signature by noon, the entire deal collapses and my investors pull their capital. I will be ruined, and I am not letting a pathetic corporate desk jockey take down my empire. Before I could press the nurse call button, DeAndre lunged. He grabbed my right wrist with a crushing, brutal grip. His large hand wrapped entirely around my forearm, his fingers digging painfully into my skin, right over the bruised injection site of my intravenous line. I gasped in pain, trying to yank my arm back, but he was too strong. Hold her steady, DeAndre barked at Vivian, reaching into his inner suit pocket with his free hand. Vivian did not hesitate. The mother who had supposedly given me life leaned over the hospital bed and pressed her hands down hard on my left shoulder, pinning me against the mattress so I could not struggle. Jerome simply looked away, staring out the window, completely abandoning his daughter to a physical assault. What are you doing? I yelled, kicking my legs weakly under the blankets. The surgical staples in my stomach burning like hot coals. Let go of me. DeAndre pulled a small black ink pad from his pocket. He popped the lid off with his thumb. If you will not sign it, your fingerprint will serve as legal biometric consent. He sneered, his breath hot and foul against my face. My contact at the bank owes me a favor. He will process a thumbprint on a secondary liability form. I am getting this mortgage today, Tessa, whether you want to give it to me or not. He twisted my wrist violently, forcing my arm downward. I screamed as the needle of the intravenous line shifted dangerously inside my vein. He pressed my thumb forcefully against the spongy surface of the ink pad, staining my skin with dark, permanent ink. I thrashed wildly, fighting with every ounce of strength my weakened body possessed. But the combined weight of DeAndre holding my arm and Vivian pinning my shoulder was entirely too much to overcome. You are making this harder than it needs to be, Vivian scolded me, her voice dripping with utter venom. Just let him take the print, Tessa. It will all be over in a second. Stop being so incredibly stubborn. DeAndre grabbed one of the torn halves of the mortgage contract, flipping to the signature page. He raised my ink-stained thumb, aiming it directly at the dotted line. I braced myself for the final humiliating violation. But before my thumb could make contact with the crisp white paper, a sound thundered through the room that made the blood freeze in DeAndre's veins. The heavy oak door to my intensive care suite was kicked open with such explosive, catastrophic force that the brass handle embedded itself an inch deep into the drywall. The deafening crash echoed like a gunshot. Vivian shrieked instantly, jumping back from my bed. DeAndre froze his grip on my wrist, loosening just enough for me to snatch my arm away. I cradled my bruised wrist against my chest, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Elias Thorne walked into the room. I did not walk like a man entering a hospital. He walked like an executioner stepping onto a scaffold. The temperature in the room plummeted to an absolute terrifying 0. He was flanked by his towering head of security, a man whose hand rested casually but deliberately near the holster on his belt. The two guards from the hallway stepped in right behind them, sealing the exit. My family was completely trapped. Elias wore the same impeccably tailored navy suit from yesterday, but the aura of calm business negotiation was entirely gone. His dark eyes locked onto DeAndre with a lethal, unblinking intensity that commanded instant submission. The air in the suite grew incredibly heavy, suffocatingly thick with the sheer, undeniable weight of a billionaire's fury. Vivian clamped a hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with terror as she recognized the man who had thrown her out of the lobby just a day prior. Simone shrank back against the wall, shrinking away from the overwhelming power radiating from the doorway. Jerome remained frozen, practically trying to melt into the window frame to avoid drawing attention. DeAndre turned completely ashen. The arrogant sneer vanished from his face, replaced by the pale, sweaty sheen of a cornered animal, realizing it had just walked blindly into a lion's den. He dropped the ink pad. It bounced off the mattress and rolled harmlessly onto the polished floor. Elias stepped forward, his polished leather shoes making absolutely no sound on the floor. He moved with slow, deliberate grace until he was standing just inches away from DeAndre. The height difference was marginal, but Elias towered over my brother-in-law in every way that truly mattered in this corporate world. Elias tilted his head slightly, studying DeAndre's terrified face with an expression of cold, clinical disgust. "You look familiar," Elias said, his smooth, deep baritone slicing through the tense silence like a sharpened razor blade. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The quiet menace in his tone was infinitely more terrifying than any loud shout. DeAndre swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly against his throat. "I do not know who you are, man," he stammered, his bravado entirely crushed under the immense pressure of the room. "You have got the wrong guy. We are just handling some private family business here." Elias offered a slow, chilling smirk that did not reach his cold eyes. "I never have the wrong," he replied softly, tilting his chin up. "You look exactly like the man currently under investigation by my forensic accounting team for a $5 million corporate fraud scheme involving fictitious technology companies." The blood drained completely from DeAndre's face. His knees buckled slightly, his arrogant posture collapsing under the crushing weight of exposure. Elias took another step forward, closing the distance until there was barely an inch of space between them. "Let me be very clear," Elias whispered, his voice dark and deadly, commanding the unwavering attention of everyone present in the room. "If you ever lay another finger on my senior consultant, I will not bother calling the police to handle this situation. I will dismantle your pathetic little life brick by brick, and I will personally make sure you spend the rest of your miserable existence rotting in a federal prison cell without a single penny to your name. Now back away from her bed before I completely lose my patience and decide to end you right here." DeAndre stumbled backward, tripping over his own expensive leather shoes in his desperate haste to get away from Elias. He bumped into Vivian, who let out a sharp squeak of sheer terror. Simone pressed her hands over her face, trembling violently as her perfect facade crumbled. Jerome remained perfectly still, a coward until the very bitter end. The power dynamic in the room had shifted permanently. My family had walked in believing they held all the cards, but they had just been dealt a devastating losing hand by a man who owned the entire casino. I looked at Elias, a renewed sense of strength surging through my recovering body. The war had officially begun, and I was no longer fighting this battle alone. I was standing beside an absolute titan, ready to unleash absolute devastation on the ruthless parasites who had tried to destroy me. I felt the ink drying on my thumb, a permanent reminder of the lengths they would go to, but I also felt the undeniable thrill of the impending brutal reckoning. The moment of fear was gone, completely replaced by an overwhelming, satisfying wave of cold, calculated vengeance. They had pushed me too far, and now they were going to pay the ultimate price for their unforgivable sins. Every single drop of blood they had squeezed from me over the decades was about to be reclaimed. The hospital room felt different now, no longer a place of vulnerability, but the very headquarters where their absolute destruction would be meticulously planned. I watched DeAndre cower, and I smiled, knowing the nightmare had just begun. Elias did not have to say another word. His silence was far more lethal than any shouted threat. He simply stood there, a towering monument of corporate power, waiting for my family to process the absolute ruin he had just promised them. Vivian was the first to break. The haughty matriarch, who had just held me down while I was recovering from major surgery, now scrambled backward like a frightened child. She grabbed Jerome by his suit sleeve, practically dragging my father toward the door. Jerome did not even look back at me. He kept his eyes glued to the floor, shuffling out of the room, completely abandoning his treacherous son-in-law to the waiting wolves. Simone was next. She backed away slowly, her designer heels scraping awkwardly against the polished linoleum. She looked at DeAndre, her eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and mounting terror. She wanted the $2 million mansion. She wanted the promotion party. But looking at Elias Thorne, she realized her husband was not a tech visionary. He was prey. Without saying a word to the man she married, Simone turned and bolted into the hallway, her footsteps echoing rapidly as she ran toward the elevators. That left DeAndre. He was sweating profusely now, heavy drops rolling down his forehead and soaking into the collar of his custom-tailored shirt. He stood entirely alone in the center of the intensive care suite, surrounded by Elias and his towering security guards. DeAndre opened his mouth desperately, trying to formulate some kind of defense, some smooth-talking lie that usually got him out of trouble. But Elias simply tilted his head toward the door. He did not speak. He just gave DeAndre a single freezing look that clearly communicated his immediate exit was not a request. It was a countdown. DeAndre swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He turned and practically ran out of the room, fleeing the hospital without looking back. The heavy oak door swung shut, clicking softly into place. The sudden quiet in the room was deafening. The guards resumed their positions outside. Elias Thorne turned his attention back to me. The predatory edge in his posture softened just a fraction as he unbuttoned his suit jacket and pulled a leather chair close to my hospital bed. He sat down, crossing one leg over the other, projecting an air of absolute control and calculated patience. "You have excellent composure under pressure," Tessa Elias said quietly, his eyes studying my face. "Most people would have signed those papers to make the screaming stop. You ripped them in half while recovering from a septic rupture. That tells me everything I need to know about your psychological resilience." I let out a slow, shaky breath, carefully cradling my bruised wrist. "I spent my entire life signing things to make the screaming stop," I replied, my voice raspy but steady. "I am done paying for their illusions." "But you mentioned a $5 million corporate fraud scheme. You said your forensic accounting team is investigating DeAndre. How do you know about that?" Elias leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He clasped his hands together, his gaze intense and unwavering. 3 months ago, my venture capital firm was approached by a charismatic entrepreneur looking for a massive injection of seed funding. Elias began, his voice dropping into a smooth, commanding cadence. He presented an incredibly sophisticated pitch deck for a new artificial intelligence platform. The financial projections were immaculate. The market analysis was flawless. My board of directors was completely sold. We were 72 hours away from wiring a $50 million initial investment into his holding company. I listened carefully, the analytical side of my brain automatically engaging. DeAndre had always been a smooth talker, but I never realized he had managed to secure a meeting with a titan like Elias Thorne. But then, Elias continued, something highly unusual happened. A heavily encrypted anonymous dossier was delivered directly to my private email server. It bypassed every single firewall my cybersecurity team had built. The sender used a secure routing network that made them practically ghosts. But the contents of that dossier were absolutely devastating. Elias reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a silver flash drive, placing it gently on the edge of my tray table. The dossier contained a microscopic forensic teardown of the entrepreneur's financial architecture. Elias explained. It exposed a brilliant, deeply hidden $5 million deficit. The company was not an artificial intelligence platform. It was an elaborate, sophisticated Ponzi scheme. The founder was using early investor capital to fund a lavish personal lifestyle while desperately seeking a massive payout from my firm to cover the missing millions before the entire structure collapsed. If my firm had wired that $50 million, we would have suffered a catastrophic loss and a humiliating public relations disaster. I stared at the silver flash drive, my heart rate picking up. The details sounded eerily familiar. "The analysis in that dossier was not just good," Elias said, his voice laced with profound respect. "It was the work of an absolute genius." The whistleblower noticed discrepancies in the shell company tax filings that my own senior auditors missed entirely. They mapped out the entire money laundering operation perfectly. I immediately halted the funding transfer. I launched an internal investigation. It took my team 3 weeks to verify the claims made by the anonymous sender. Everything in the dossier was 100% accurate. I swallowed hard, the pieces clicking together in my mind. "You tracked the sender," I whispered. Elias nodded slowly, a predatory smirk touching the corners of his mouth. "I spent vast resources tracking the digital footprint of that email. I employ the best cybersecurity experts on the planet. It took them 2 months to crack the encryption and trace the source address. They traced it to a risk assessment consultant, working late nights on a secured network in a downtown Atlanta apartment building. I froze. 3 months ago, during a late review session at my firm, I had stumbled across a highly suspicious portfolio left on a communal printer. I analyzed the data out of pure curiosity, realizing it was a massive fraud structure. Knowing my firm would bury it to avoid liability, I took it upon myself to anonymously alert the target investor. I never knew the target was Thorn Ventures, and I certainly never knew the fraudster was DeAndre. You were the anonymous analyst. Tessa Elias stated, his dark eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made the breath catch in my throat. You saved my empire from a catastrophic hit. You protected my legacy. I looked down at my hands, processing the sheer magnitude of his revelation. And the fraudster running the fake startup, I asked, my voice trembling slightly as the horrifying reality fully materialized. Elias leaned back in his chair, his expression hardening into a mask of pure lethal determination. The man who pitched that fraudulent company to my board, the man who tried to steal $50 million from me, was DeAndre, your sister's husband. The room spun. The walls felt like they were closing in on me. DeAndre was the mastermind. The $50,000 Vivian had begged me for, the money she claimed was for a venue deposit, was actually a desperate attempt to pay off aggressive creditors because DeAndre's scam was unraveling. I tracked you down to offer you a position as senior partner at Thorn Ventures. Elias explained, his voice softening slightly as he looked at my pale face. I wanted the genius who saved my firm working exclusively for me. I arrived at your office building 3 days ago, only to have my security team intercept a scene in your lobby. We watched your mother extort $50,000 from you. We watched you transfer the funds to DeAndre's account under extreme emotional duress. I closed my eyes, a wave of profound shame washing over me. He had seen me at my absolute weakest. When you did not show up for work the next 2 days, my team tracked your location. Elias continued, his tone turning dark and furious. They found you bleeding out in an emergency room. I arrived just in time to watch your mother demand your discharge so you could sign papers to secure a $2 million mansion for the very man stealing from them. Your family abandoned you to die for a fraudster, Tessa. I opened my eyes, meeting the gaze of the billionaire who had saved my life. I was no longer a victim. The terrified daughter was gone. I looked at the encrypted laptop and the silver flash drive resting on my table. I felt a cold, calculated fury replacing the grief in my heart. They left me to die, I said softly. Now we are going to make sure they lose everything. Elias Thorne offered a slow, sharp smile that mirrored the freezing anger radiating from my own chest. He did not offer empty platitudes or gentle reassurances. He simply nodded, stepping back from the hospital bed and gesturing toward the matte black laptop resting on the tray table. The machine was heavy, encased in military-grade titanium, and hummed with a quiet, lethal efficiency. I reached out my fingers, brushing against the cold metal casing. Every slight movement sent a fiery spike of pain through my healing abdominal incision, but the physical agony was entirely eclipsed by the burning need for absolute truth. I opened the laptop. The screen flared to life, instantly requesting a biometric scan. Elias pressed his thumb to the sensor pad on the lower right corner. A series of complex encryption protocols cascaded down the high-definition screen, bypassing regional firewalls and establishing a direct, untraceable connection to the dark web and global financial mainframes. I shifted my position against the sterile hospital pillows, ignoring the persistent tug of my intravenous lines. I was a risk assessment consultant. I spent my days dissecting corporate vulnerabilities, hunting down hidden liabilities, and predicting catastrophic financial failures. Now I was going to turn those exact same weapons on my own bloodline. I flexed my stiff fingers over the illuminated keyboard. I started by logging into my primary credit monitoring accounts. On the surface, my financial profile looked pristine. My credit score was immaculate, my single mortgage was paid on time, and my savings accounts were healthy, aside from the $50,000 hole Vivian had recently blasted through them. But my mother had been far too confident when she handed DeAndre that pen. DeAndre had been far too certain that he held the keys to my financial ruin. They were operating with a level of arrogance that suggested they had been playing this game for a very long time. I opened a secure terminal window and accessed a proprietary shadow scanner I used for high-level corporate audits. This program did not just check standard credit bureaus. It crawled through encrypted bank registries, offshore holding company directories, and dark web data brokers. I typed in my social security number, my full legal name, and my date of birth. I hit enter. The progress bar crawled across the screen. The intensive care suite was dead silent, save for the rhythmic, steady beeping of my heart monitor and the quiet hum of the laptop fan. Elias stood silently by the window, his imposing figure framed against the Atlanta skyline, watching me work with the patient observation of a predator waiting for the trap to spring. The screen flashed red. A cascade of hidden data flooded the terminal. My breath caught in my throat. My hands began to shake, not from physical weakness, but from the sheer, staggering magnitude of the betrayal scrolling rapidly before my eyes. There was not just one hidden account, there were dozens. I clicked on the first flagged file. It was a line of credit opened 7 years ago, attached to an address I had never lived at, but one I recognized instantly. It was the address of Vivian and Jerome's previous suburban home. The account was opened using my exact social security number, but the primary contact email was a masked address I knew belonged to my father. I clicked on the next file. A high-yield business loan approved 4 years ago for a boutique public relations firm. Simone's public relations firm. The loan was for $200,000. The guarantor listed on the digital paperwork was Tessa. The biometric signature matched a digital copy of my old driver's license. My chest tightened as a wave of pure nausea washed over me. I clicked file after file, digging deeper into the digital graveyard of my stolen identity. Credit cards maxed out on luxury designer brands. Auto loans for imported vehicles driven by Simone and DeAndre. Secondary mortgages taken out on properties I had never seen, all funneled through a labyrinth of shell corporations. My parents had not just favored Simone. They had actively, systematically stolen my identity to fund her entire existence. Vivian and Jerome had taken my social security number, a number they had access to since the day I was born, and weaponized it. While I was working 90-hour weeks, sacrificing my youth to build a stable career, my parents were operating as identity thieves. They were quietly securing massive lines of credit in my name, ensuring that my pristine financial record served as the invisible scaffolding for Simone's glamorous influencer lifestyle. The betrayal was so profound, it physically took the breath from my lungs. They had raised me to be a workhorse, demanding absolute perfection, demanding straight A grades and high-paying corporate jobs, not because they wanted me to succeed, but because they needed my credit profile to be absolutely bulletproof. I was not a daughter. I was a premium asset they were harvesting. I looked up at Elias. My eyes were burning with unshed tears of pure, unadulterated rage. They stole my identity. I whispered, my voice trembling with a fury so deep it shook my entire frame. My parents. They have been taking out loans in my name for years. They funded Simone's PR firm. They bought DeAndre's cars. They used my social security number to build a shadow empire. Elias did not look surprised. He slowly walked back to the side of my bed, his dark eyes fixed on the glowing screen. "Keep digging, Tessa," he commanded softly. "Follow the money from 3 days ago. Follow the $50,000. I turned back to the keyboard, my fingers flying across the keys with ruthless precision. I accessed my bank records, isolating the $50,000 wire transfer I had sent to DeAndre, while Vivian stood crying in my office lobby. She had sworn on her own life that the money was for a luxury venue deposit. She claimed DeAndre needed to secure a hotel ballroom to impress a group of angel investors. I traced the routing number DeAndre had provided. The dark web scanner ripped through the banking masks in seconds. The receiving account did not belong to a luxury hotel. It did not belong to a corporate event planner. The money had been wired directly into an offshore account registered in the Cayman Islands. I ran a cross-reference on the account holder's name using Thorn Ventures' proprietary database. The result popped up instantly, flashing a severe red warning across the screen. The account belonged to a known, highly dangerous loan shark operating out of Miami, a man currently under investigation by the federal government for aggressive racketeering and extortion. I stared at the screen, the final piece of the horrifying puzzle sliding into place. DeAndre had not needed a venue deposit. DeAndre was drowning. The $5 million Ponzi scheme he had tried to pitch to Elias was collapsing around him. He had borrowed money from dangerous, violent people to maintain the illusion of his tech empire, and those people had come to collect. Vivian knew. My mother knew exactly how much danger her golden son-in-law was in. That was why she had shown up at my office weeping hysterically, manipulating my deeply ingrained sense of familial duty. She had not come to borrow money for a party. She had come to extort $50,000 from me to pay off a violent criminal. She had handed over her eldest daughter's hard-earned savings to a loan shark to save DeAndre's pathetic life. And when my appendix ruptured when I lay dying on a hospital bed, she ignored my phone calls because she was busy coordinating the next phase of their massive fraud. The $2 million mansion they wanted me to sign for today. It was not a home for Simone. It was a desperate final attempt to secure a massive asset they could liquidate to pay off the rest of DeAndre's criminal debts. They needed my ink-stained thumbprint, because their shadow accounts were maxed out. They needed my physical presence to cross the finish line of their ultimate heist. A strange, terrifying calm washed over me. The tears that had been burning in my eyes evaporated entirely, replaced by a cold, hollow emptiness. The woman who had craved her mother's love, who had desperately wanted to be seen and valued by her father, who had tried to be a good sister to Simone, that woman was dead. She had flatlined on the operating table, and she was never coming back. My family was not just a group of toxic, emotionally abusive relatives. They were a highly coordinated criminal syndicate. They were a nest of vipers feeding off my blood, my sweat, and my identity. They had sacrificed my financial future and ultimately my physical life to protect a petty street grifter dressed in a custom suit. I reached up and wiped a single stray drop of sweat from my forehead. I closed the financial centers, saving every single document, every fraudulent loan application, every wire transfer receipt into a highly encrypted secure folder on Elias's flash drive. I had the blueprints to their entire criminal enterprise. I had the exact coordinates of every lie they had ever told. I slowly closed the heavy titanium laptop. The quiet click of the latch locking into place sounded like a cell door slamming shut. I looked up at Elias Thorne. The billionaire venture capitalist was watching me with a look of dark, profound satisfaction. He recognized the shift in my posture. He saw the lethal, uncompromising resolve hardening in my eyes. "Do you have everything you need?" Elias asked quietly, his voice a smooth, dangerous rumble in the sterile hospital room. I took a deep, steadying breath, ignoring the burning surgical staples stretching across my abdomen. "I have the entire network," I replied, my voice sounding completely foreign to my own ears. Cold, ruthless, unbreakable. They committed massive identity theft, wire fraud, bank fraud, money laundering. My parents orchestrated the loans. Simone washed the money through her PR firm, and DeAndre funneled it to offshore criminals. They are all guilty, every single one of them. Elias stepped forward, leaning against the edge of the tray table. "Tomorrow night is Simone's promotion gala," he stated, his eyes gleaming with anticipated destruction. "The entire corporate elite of Atlanta will be in attendance. Every investor DeAndre is trying to scam will be sitting in that ballroom. Your mother will be wearing a designer gown paid for by your stolen credit, boasting about her perfect wealthy family." I nodded slowly, a predatory smile pulling at the corners of my mouth. I knew exactly what needed to be done. We are not just going to call the police, Elias. Handing them over to the authorities in secret is far too merciful. They care about their image more than they care about human life. They care about their high society status more than they cared about their own daughter bleeding to death. Elias offered a slow, wicked smirk. "Then we burn their image to ashes in front of everyone they are trying to impress." "I want to crash that party," I declared, the adrenaline entirely masking my physical pain. "I want to walk into that ballroom. I want to stand on that stage, and I want to execute them professionally, financially, and socially. I want to watch them lose absolutely everything in real time." Elias Thorne straightened his jacket, looking down at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated respect. The kingmaker had just found his queen of spades. "Consider it done." Tessa Elias promised, his voice echoing with absolute authority. I will arrange a private medical transport. I will secure you a gown that accommodates your surgical drains. And I will make sure every screen in that ballroom is wired directly to this laptop. Rest now. Tomorrow we go to war. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind Elias Thorne, leaving me alone in the sterile quiet of the executive intensive care suite. The digital clock on the wall glowed a harsh green, reminding me that I had less than 30 hours until Simone stood on a stage and basked in the stolen glory of her fraudulent promotion. I placed my hands flat against the cool metal casing of the laptop. My physical body was battered, sliced open, and stitched back together, but my mind had never been sharper. I spent the remainder of the afternoon and the entire night awake, fighting through waves of surgical pain, compiling the ultimate digital execution. I organized every single piece of evidence into a devastating, inescapable presentation. I pulled the offshore wire transfers, the forged loan applications, the maxed out credit card statements, and the internal audit reports Elias had provided regarding DeAndre's $5 million Ponzi scheme. I color-coded the flow of money. I highlighted the dates Vivian and Jerome had used my social security number. I attached the audio file I had secretly managed to extract from my voicemail, the one where my mother told me to stop being dramatic, while I was literally dying of sepsis. I built a financial guillotine designed to drop with flawless precision in front of the most influential people in the city. Simone's promotion gala was not just a simple office party. It was the social event of the season for Atlanta's black corporate elite. The public relations firm she worked for had rented out the grand ballroom at the St. Regis Hotel in Buckhead. There would be hundreds of guests: wealthy investors, prominent politicians, media moguls, and high society socialites. This was the exact crowd Vivian had spent her entire life trying to impress. This was the room DeAndre needed to secure his next round of victims. They were all going to be there dressed in custom tuxedos and designer gowns, sipping expensive champagne, completely unaware that the ground beneath them was rigged with financial explosives. By dawn, my presentation was flawless. I closed the laptop just as the morning light began to spill over the Atlanta skyline. A few hours later, Elias kept his promise. The door to my suite opened, but it was not the hospital staff. A team of highly specialized private medical professionals walked in, coordinated directly by Thorne Ventures. They were accompanied by a sharp-looking woman carrying a large, opaque garment bag. She introduced herself as Elias's personal stylist. She hung the bag on the back of the door and unzipped it, revealing a breathtaking, custom-tailored emerald green gown. The dress was a masterpiece of strategic design. It featured long, elegant sleeves and a high-structured neckline that projected absolute power. But more importantly, the heavy flowing silk of the skirt was masterfully crafted with hidden interior pockets and reinforced structural paneling. It was specifically designed to conceal the surgical drains currently attached to my abdomen and the portable intravenous medication pump strapped to my waist. I could walk into the grand ballroom looking like corporate royalty, and no one would ever suspect that beneath the emerald silk, I was quite literally held together by medical staples and sheer willpower. The medical team worked with swift, silent efficiency. They checked my vitals, administered a carefully calculated dose of non-drowsy pain medication, and securely taped my surgical drains against my torso to prevent any accidental shifting. The stylist helped me step into the emerald gown, her hands gentle but purposeful. She arranged my hair into a sleek, pulled-back style that highlighted the sharp angles of my face, and applied a flawless layer of makeup that completely erased the pale, sickly pallor of my near-death experience. When I looked in the full-length mirror the stylist had brought, I did not recognize the woman staring back at me. The exhausted, people-pleasing daughter was gone entirely. I looked absolutely lethal. Elias walked into the room just as I was clasping a pair of diamond earrings around my lobes. He had changed into a midnight black tuxedo that fit his broad shoulders perfectly, looking every bit the apex predator he was. He stopped in the center of the room, his dark eyes sweeping over my transformed appearance. He offered a slow, approving nod, the kingmaker recognizing his weapon of choice. He handed me a sleek earpiece no larger than a grain of rice and instructed me to place it in my right ear. My tech team has successfully infiltrated the audiovisual mainframe at the hotel. Elias explained, his voice low and thrumming with dangerous anticipation. They bypassed the hotel security protocols an hour ago. When you give the verbal command through that earpiece, my team will instantly hijack the massive projection screens behind the main stage. Your presentation will override their scheduled programming. Every microphone, every speaker, and every screen in that grand ballroom will belong entirely to you, Tessa. We are going to lock the doors and force them to watch their empire burn. I nodded, adjusting the tiny earpiece until it was completely invisible beneath my hair. I picked up a small black clutch purse, slipping the heavily encrypted flash drive containing my presentation inside. It contained every single fraudulent bank statement, every unauthorized loan application, and the audio recording that would completely shatter my mother's carefully curated facade. I traced the smooth edges of the drive, feeling the immense weight of the truth contained within that tiny device. The pain in my stomach was a dull, persistent throbbing, a constant reminder of the physical cost of their betrayal. But the adrenaline surging through my veins was a powerful anesthetic. I was ready. I looked at Elias, matching his cold, uncompromising energy. "Let us go now," I commanded softly. We did not leave the hospital through the main lobby. Elias had arranged for a private subterranean exit, a discreet medical transport van heavily modified to look like a luxury executive sprinter was waiting for us in the underground loading dock. The interior was equipped with emergency medical supplies, and a private trauma nurse sat quietly in the corner, ready to intervene if my body decided to fail me again. But my body was not going to fail. I was running on pure, unadulterated vengeance. Elias sat across from me as the transport van pulled out of the hospital garage and merged onto the busy Atlanta streets. The tinted windows shielded us from the outside world, creating a dark, quiet sanctuary as we moved closer to the epicenter of my family's destruction. I watched the city blur past my mind, replaying every cruel comment, every manipulative tear, every single dollar they had extorted from me over the past decade. They had built their entire identity on the illusion of success, using my stolen credit and my drained savings accounts as the mortar for their fraudulent bricks. My mother had probably spent all morning at the salon, bragging to her friends about Simone's massive promotion. She was likely wearing a dress purchased with a credit card opened in my name. Jerome was probably practicing a toast, completely ignoring the fact that he had stood by and watched his son-in-law physically assault me in a hospital bed. Simone was definitely rehearsing her acceptance speech, ready to thank her loving family for their unwavering support, completely oblivious to the fact that her husband was a wanted criminal. And DeAndre was probably shaking hands and passing out business cards, desperately trying to hook his next victim before his $5 million house of cards collapsed entirely. They thought they were untouchable. They thought I was securely locked away in a hospital room, too weak, too broken, and too loyal to ever strike back. They had underestimated me for the last time. The executive sprinter van pulled smoothly into the VIP loading zone at the rear of the hotel, bypassing the crowded valet line at the front entrance. Elias's private security team was already on site, blending seamlessly into the hotel staff and the background crowds. One of his men, wearing a tailored suit with a discreet earpiece, opened the side door of the van and offered me his hand. I stepped out into the humid Georgia night air. The heavy emerald silk of my gown flowed flawlessly around my legs, hiding the medical equipment strapped to my body. I stood tall, my spine perfectly straight, ignoring the sharp pull of the surgical staples. Elias stepped out behind me, adjusting his cuffs with a calm, terrifying grace. He offered me his arm. "Are you ready to meet your guests?" Elias asked, his voice a smooth, dark rumble over the background noise of the city. I placed my hand firmly on his arm, feeling the solid, unyielding strength of the billionaire who had handed me the match to light the fire. I looked toward the heavy service doors leading directly into the backstage corridors of the grand ballroom. I could hear the faint, muffled thumping of the bass from the party inside. Hundreds of people were in there drinking, laughing, and networking, completely unaware that the guest of honor was about to be publicly executed. "I am ready to burn it all down," I replied, my voice ringing with absolute certainty. We walked through the service doors, moving through the dimly lit, chaotic backstage hallways of the hotel kitchen. The scent of roasted truffles and expensive catering filled the air, a stark contrast to the sterile smell of the hospital room I had just left behind. Waiters rushed past us carrying trays of expensive hors d'oeuvres and champagne flutes. No one stopped us. No one questioned the imposing billionaire and the woman in the emerald gown. Elias's security team had already cleared our path, ensuring we had completely unobstructed access to the main event. We reached the heavy, ornate mahogany doors that opened directly into the grand ballroom. The doors were currently closed, muffling the roar of the high society crowd gathered on the other side. I stood before the polished wood, my heart beating a steady, powerful rhythm against my ribs. I reached into my clutch and pressed my thumb against the cool metal of the flash drive. The pain in my abdomen flared, a sharp reminder of the ultimate betrayal, but I welcomed the agony. It grounded me. It fueled me. I glanced at Elias. He gave a sharp, subtle nod to his head of security standing nearby. The security chief reached out, grasping the heavy brass handles of the mahogany doors. The moment of reckoning had officially arrived. The invisible bankroll was about to become the most dangerous woman in the room. The heavy wooden doors swung wide open, instantly spilling brilliant golden light and the deafening roar of applause into the hallway. I stepped forward into the brilliance, letting the shadows fall away behind me. This was my stage now, and I was certainly going to deliver a performance that Atlanta's corporate elite would never ever forget. Vivian, Jerome, Simone, and DeAndre were about to learn exactly what happens when you leave a risk analyst to die and assume she will not calculate the absolute cost of your destruction. The bill was finally due, and I was here to collect every single penny with interest. There would be no mercy tonight, only the cold, unyielding precision of absolute justice served on a silver platter. The game they thought they controlled was over, and I was the one holding all the winning cards in my hand. I took a deep breath, lifted my chin high, and marched directly into the center of their glittering, fraudulent, pathetic little world. The transition from the dim backstage corridor into the blinding brilliance of the grand ballroom hit my senses like a physical wave. The sheer, unadulterated opulence of the space was nauseating when I fully understood the criminal foundation it was built upon. Massive crystal chandeliers cascaded from the vaulted ceilings, casting a warm, expensive, golden glow over the meticulously dressed crowd. Waiters wearing crisp white jackets and black bow ties glided seamlessly across the polished marble floors, balancing silver trays loaded with crystal flutes of vintage champagne and delicate caviar-topped hors d'oeuvres. A live string quartet played a sophisticated modern classical arrangement on a slightly elevated platform in the corner, providing the perfect acoustic backdrop for high society networking. The room was absolutely packed. I recognized dozens of faces immediately. These were the elite power players of Atlanta's corporate ecosystem. There were managing directors from top-tier investment banks, prominent local politicians, media magnates, and influential real estate developers. It was a sea of custom-tailored tuxedos and floor-length designer gowns. This was the exact demographic my mother had worshipped for her entire adult life. This was the crowd she had sacrificed my financial security and ultimately my physical safety to impress. I stood just inside the massive threshold, remaining partially obscured by the shadow of a towering floral arrangement. Elias stood perfectly still beside me, a silent, imposing sentinel, allowing me to survey the battlefield before we launched our offensive. My eyes scanned the glittering crowd, tracking the movements of my targets with the cold, clinical precision of an apex predator. I spotted DeAndre first. He was standing near a towering ice sculpture holding a glass of amber liquid, laughing loudly with a group of senior venture capitalists. He wore a custom velvet dinner jacket that screamed new money. He was playing the role of the successful tech visionary, flawlessly shaking hands and clapping men on the shoulder, radiating a charismatic charm that masked the desperate, cornered fraudster I knew him to be. I watched him smoothly hand a sleek black business card to an older investor actively setting the hook for his next fraudulent acquisition. A few yards away from DeAndre, a professional photographer's flash repeatedly illuminated the room. Simone was holding court in front of a massive custom-built media wall adorned with the logo of her public relations firm and the words "Promoting Excellence." She looked absolutely radiant in a skin-tight ruby red gown, striking perfectly rehearsed poses for the cameras. She was completely in her element, basking in the artificial glow of a promotion she had secured through nepotism and illegal financial maneuvering. A small line of junior executives and socialites waited to congratulate her, and she accepted their praise with practiced fake humility, air-kissing cheeks and tossing her head back in melodic choreographed laughter. But my gaze did not linger on my sister. I turned my attention to the center of the ballroom, where the true architect of my destruction was putting on the performance of a lifetime. Vivian was surrounded by a tight circle of wealthy, influential socialites. She wore a stunning silver beaded gown that I instantly recognized. I had seen the exact charge for that dress on a fraudulently opened credit card statement just hours ago. She held a crystal champagne flute elegantly by the stem, commanding the absolute attention of the women around her. I motioned for Elias to remain still. We stood quietly in the periphery, perfectly positioned to overhear her conversation over the gentle hum of the string quartet. "Oh, DeAndre is simply a genius," Vivian boasted, her voice carrying a loud, grating tone of utter superiority. "His new artificial intelligence platform is about to revolutionize the entire medical technology sector. We are so incredibly blessed. He just secured a massive round of funding, and he and my beautiful Simone are closing on a stunning $2 million estate in Buckhead next week. It is just so wonderful to see their hard work paying off so beautifully." One of the older women in the circle, a prominent judge's wife, took a small sip of her champagne and smiled politely. "They certainly make a striking couple, Vivian. But tell me, where is your other daughter tonight? I haven't seen Tessa in ages. Is she not joining the celebration?" The fake radiant smile on Vivian's face dropped for a fraction of a second before morphing into a mask of profound manufactured tragedy. She let out a long, heavy sigh, placing her free hand dramatically over her heart. "It is just breaking my heart," Vivian murmured, lowering her voice to a theatrical, conspiratorial whisper that was specifically designed to draw the listeners closer. "Tessa could not make it tonight. We are currently dealing with a very difficult, very private family medical situation." "Oh dear," the judge's wife replied, her brow furrowing with genuine concern. "Is she physically ill?" Vivian shook her head sadly, looking down at her diamond rings. "If only it were that simple. Tessa has been struggling severely with her mental health for the past few months. The pressure of her corporate job simply broke her. She had a complete psychological collapse earlier this week. Jerome and I had to make the agonizing decision to place her in a private, locked psychiatric clinic for her own safety. She has become completely unstable, paranoid, and prone to violent outbursts. We are just praying she finds the peace she so desperately needs, but it has been a terrible burden on our family." The women in the circle gasped, collectively murmuring sympathetic apologies and offering their prayers. Vivian soaked up their pity like a sponge, playing the role of the martyred, long-suffering mother to absolute perfection. She was actively building a defensive narrative. By labeling me as mentally unstable and paranoid, she was ensuring that if I ever tried to expose their financial crimes, nobody in their elite circle would believe a word I said. It was a masterclass in psychological manipulation and preemptive character assassination. I felt a cold, hard knot of pure rage tighten in my chest. The audacity of her lies was staggering. She had left me to die of sepsis, tried to forcefully drag my newly stitched body out of an intensive care unit, to sign a fraudulent mortgage, and was now standing in a stolen gown, telling the most powerful people in Atlanta that I was locked in an insane asylum. I looked up at Elias Thorne. His jaw was clenched, his dark eyes fixed on Vivian with a look of absolute, chilling, predatory intent. He slowly offered me his arm. "Are you ready to correct the narrative?" Tessa Elias asked quietly, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. I slipped my hand securely through the crook of his arm, feeling the solid, unyielding muscle beneath his tailored tuxedo jacket. The sharp pain of my surgical staples faded, entirely replaced by a massive, surging wave of adrenaline. "Let them see exactly how unstable I am," I replied, my voice echoing with lethal determination. I reached up and pressed a finger against the tiny, invisible earpiece hidden beneath my hair. "Execute the override," I commanded clearly into the microphone. The reaction was instantaneous and spectacular. The soft, sophisticated music of the string quartet was suddenly violently cut off. A piercing, high-pitched screech of electronic feedback blasted through the massive speakers positioned around the grand ballroom, causing several guests to flinch and cover their ears. The ambient golden lighting of the chandeliers abruptly dimmed to a harsh, stark white. But the most dramatic shift occurred at the heavy mahogany doors leading into the ballroom. Elias's security chief stepped forward and grabbed the brass handles. With a powerful synchronized heave, the guards threw the massive doors completely open, causing them to slam loudly against the interior walls. The echoing boom silenced the remaining chatter in the room instantly. Every single head in the grand ballroom turned simultaneously toward the entrance. Elias Thorne and I stepped directly into the center of the blinding spotlight. We stood framed in the massive doorway, an imposing unified front of absolute power and impending destruction. I looked completely radiant, encased in the heavy flowing emerald silk of my designer gown. My posture was rigid, my chin held high, radiating a terrifying, untouchable confidence. And holding my arm, escorting me into the room like a king presenting his queen, was the phantom billionaire himself. A collective sharp gasp rippled through the crowd of hundreds. It started near the entrance and spread like wildfire toward the back of the room. This was not a crowd of ignorant bystanders. These were financial elites. They knew exactly who Elias Thorne was. They knew he was a titan, a ruthless corporate conqueror who controlled billions of dollars in venture capital and rarely attended local social events. His presence alone was enough to send shockwaves through the room. But the true shock, the absolute paralyzing disbelief, was directed at the woman standing firmly by his side. The whispers ignited, instantly buzzing through the crowd like a disturbed hornet's nest. "Is that Tessa?" a voice murmured nearby. "I thought Vivian just said she was locked in a psychiatric ward," another voice whispered harshly. "Why is Elias Thorne escorting her? What is going on?" I kept my gaze locked forward, scanning the crowd, until my eyes landed directly on my family. The physical reaction to my arrival was a masterpiece of human panic. DeAndre dropped his crystal glass of amber liquid. It shattered against the polished marble floor, splashing alcohol over the shoes of the venture capitalists he had been schmoozing. His mouth hung open, his face draining of all color until he looked completely ashen. He recognized Elias immediately from the hospital room. He knew exactly what this meant. Simone froze mid-pose in front of her media wall. The photographer's flash went off, capturing a permanent high-definition image of her eyes wide with sheer, unadulterated terror. She stared at me, her hands trembling so violently she dropped her designer clutch. But it was Vivian's reaction that delivered the greatest satisfaction. The matriarch stood frozen in the center of her socialite circle. The fake tragic smile she had been wearing melted off her face, replaced by a mask of absolute paralyzing horror. She stared at me, looking from my perfectly styled hair down to my emerald gown, and finally to the arm I had looped through Elias Thorne's. She realized in that exact fraction of a second that her entire narrative had just been obliterated. The mentally unstable daughter she claimed was locked in a clinic was currently standing in the doorway, looking like corporate royalty, escorted by the most powerful man in the city. The crowd instinctively parted, creating a wide, clear path down the center of the ballroom, leading directly toward the main stage. I squeezed Elias's arm, and together we began our slow, deliberate march into the heart of their fraudulent empire. The execution had officially commenced. The parting of the crowd felt biblical. Elias and I moved in perfect synchronization, our footsteps muffled by the thick Persian rugs running down the center of the grand ballroom. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of confusion and scandalized curiosity. I kept my eyes locked on the main stage, projecting an impenetrable aura of cold authority. The heavy emerald silk of my gown swished elegantly around my ankles, hiding the surgical drains taped to my abdomen. The physical pain was entirely secondary to the surging electric thrill of the hunt. Vivian could not maintain her frozen posture of horror for long. The instinct to control the narrative, to protect her counterfeit high society image, overpowered her initial shock. She broke away from the circle of wealthy socialites she had been entertaining, her silver-beaded gown shimmering under the chandeliers as she hurried toward us. Her face was a masterclass in sheer panic masquerading as maternal concern. She forced her trembling lips into a wide, frantic smile that did not reach her terrified eyes. "Tessa, sweetheart." Vivian gasped, her voice pitched unnaturally high so the surrounding guests could hear. She stepped directly into our path, attempting to block our progress toward the stage. "What a wonderful surprise. I thought you were still resting at the wellness retreat. We were all so worried about you." She reached out her manicured fingers shaped like talons, aiming directly for my arm. Her intention was obvious. She wanted to physically grab me, to forcefully guide me away from the center of the room and shove me back out the mahogany doors before I could destroy her evening. I did not even break my stride. I slipped my hand gracefully from Elias's arm and sidestepped her grasping hands with effortless precision. Vivian stumbled slightly forward, her fingers clutching nothing but empty air. I did not look at her. I did not acknowledge her fake, desperate greeting. I simply stepped past her as if she were a minor, insignificant obstacle on the floor. Elias, however, did not just walk past her. He stopped for a fraction of a second. He turned his head, his dark, commanding eyes locking onto Vivian's terrified face. He did not say a single word. He simply delivered a look of such profound glacial menace that Vivian physically recoiled, her shoulders dropping as the remaining breath left her lungs. His silent warning was crystal clear. She was completely powerless here. Elias offered his arm to me again, and we continued our march toward the front of the room, leaving my mother trembling and humiliated in our wake. Up ahead, near the massive floral displays flanking the main stage, the panic was becoming highly visible. DeAndre had retreated into the shadows near the catering entrance, his eyes darting frantically around the room, desperately looking for an exit. But my sister had a different survival instinct. Simone realized that the whispers in the ballroom were reaching a fever pitch. She knew she had to take immediate control of the optics before the entire corporate elite of Atlanta realized her perfect family was a total fraud. Simone scrambled up the short flight of carpeted stairs leading to the main stage. Her ruby red gown caught the stage lights as she frantically signaled to the sound technicians in the back of the room, demanding they turn the background music back on. But the sound technicians were completely locked out of their own system. Elias's cybersecurity team had established absolute control over the hotel's audiovisual mainframe. The technicians just stared back at Simone, shaking their heads in helpless confusion. Realizing the music was not going to save her, Simone lunged for the microphone resting on a tall, sleek stand in the center of the stage. She gripped the metal stand tightly, her knuckles turning white, and plastered a massive, condescending smile across her face. She tapped the microphone, the sharp thud echoing loudly through the silent ballroom. "Ladies and gentlemen," Simone announced, her voice dripping with artificial syrupy sweetness. Her eyes darted nervously toward Elias, but she forced herself to look back at the crowd. "Please forgive the sudden interruption. We have a very unexpected but very special guest joining us tonight. My older sister Tessa has decided to grace us with her presence." Simone paused, letting out a soft theatrical sigh that was perfectly calibrated to convey deep, benevolent sympathy. She looked down at me as I approached the base of the stage stairs. "As many of you know, my sister has been battling some very serious, very tragic mental health challenges recently. We honestly did not think she would be well enough to leave her care facility. But family is everything to us. We support her through her darkest, most troubled times. Please let us give a warm, encouraging round of applause for my sister, who is clearly trying her best to be part of our celebration tonight." A few scattered, hesitant claps echoed through the enormous ballroom. The guests looked extremely uncomfortable, shifting in their expensive suits and designer dresses. Simone was playing the ultimate gaslighting card in front of hundreds of people. She was publicly labeling me as mentally fragile, positioning herself as the gracious, long-suffering sibling who was generously tolerating a crazy person's uninvited arrival. She thought she was neutralizing the threat by discrediting my sanity before I even opened my mouth. She was vastly underestimating the weapon I was about to unleash. I released Elias's arm. He gave me a single confirming nod, stepping back to take a dominant stance at the very front of the audience, crossing his arms over his broad chest. His security team fanned out around the perimeter of the room, silently securing all the exit doors. The trap was now fully closed. I walked up the carpeted stairs with a slow, measured grace, completely ignoring the burning protest of my fresh surgical wounds. The heavy emerald silk of my gown swept behind me, projecting an image of absolute regal authority. I did not look troubled. I did not look mentally fragile. I looked like a woman who was about to burn an empire to the ground. I stepped up to the center of the stage, stopping just a few inches away from Simone. I could see the thick layer of sweat forming on her forehead, ruining her flawless makeup. Her eyes were wide with genuine terror, searching my face for any sign of mercy. She found absolutely none. "What do you think you are doing?" Simone hissed under her breath, keeping her fake smile frozen in place for the audience, while her voice trembled with raw panic. "You are going to ruin my career. Turn around and walk out of here right now, or I swear to God I will have security drag you out." I smiled at her. It was a cold, beautiful, terrifying smile. "Security works for him now," I whispered back, nodding slightly toward Elias Thorne standing in the front row. "And your career ended the moment you tried to force my bloody thumbprint onto your fraudulent mortgage papers." Simone gasped, taking a sudden stumbling step backward. Her grip on the microphone loosened. I reached out and took the heavy silver microphone from her shaking hand. The metal felt cool and solid in my grip. I turned my attention away from my terrified sister and looked out over the vast, glittering sea of Atlanta's corporate elite. The silence in the grand ballroom was absolute. Hundreds of powerful investors, executives, and socialites stared up at me, holding their breath, waiting to see what the supposedly unstable sister was going to do. I could see Vivian standing near the center aisle, her face pale and twisted in horror. I could see DeAndre hovering near the back exit, realizing his escape route was completely blocked by men in dark suits. I raised the microphone to my lips. My voice echoed through the massive speakers, clear, resonant, and dripping with lethal composure. "Thank you, Simone," I said, projecting my voice across the enormous room. I turned slightly, offering my sister a gracious, utterly terrifying nod of acknowledgement. "Your concern for my well-being is truly touching, and you are absolutely right. It is a miracle I am here tonight." I paused, letting the words hang in the heavy, expectant air. I scanned the audience, ensuring I had their absolute, undivided attention. Literally, I continued, my voice dropping into a register of cold, hard truth. "Because 2 days ago, while my heart stopped on an operating table, our mother texted me that this party was more important than my life." The grand ballroom immediately fell into a deep, dead, suffocating silence. It was a perfectly paralyzing quiet. The wealthy socialites who had just been eagerly consuming Vivian's fabricated tragic tale of my mental illness now turned their heads, staring at my mother with expressions of profound, unadulterated disgust. The complete execution had finally just begun right now. I pressed the small, discreet button on the wireless remote concealed tightly inside my black clutch. The reaction was instantaneous. The massive 60-foot high-definition projection screens flanking the main stage suddenly flickered. The towering, heavily retouched, glamorous portraits of Simone, the ones celebrating her fake promotion, were completely wiped from the displays. The screens plunged into pitch black for a fraction of a second, causing another wave of startled murmurs to ripple through the grand ballroom. Then brilliant white light flooded the room as a highly detailed, meticulously organized digital presentation illuminated the massive screens. The opulent ballroom of the St. Regis transformed into a sterile, unforgiving courtroom. Displayed in crisp, undeniable high definition were hundreds of redacted banking records, offshore wire transfer receipts, and the damning, irrefutable pages of a forensic audit report. I had color-coded the flow of illicit money using bright, aggressive red ink. The visual impact was staggering. The wealthy investors and corporate executives in the audience squinted, raising their glasses suddenly, realizing that they were looking at highly classified financial intelligence. I kept the heavy silver microphone firmly pressed to my lips. My voice echoed with cold, clinical precision, carrying over the stunned silence of the elite crowd. "Many of you in this room tonight have been pitched a revolutionary artificial intelligence platform." I announced, my words slicing through the heavy air. "You were shown immaculate financial projections. You were sold a vision of the future. You were asked to invest millions of dollars into a groundbreaking tech startup founded by a man my family has proudly paraded around this room all evening." I turned my head slowly, locking my eyes directly onto the back of the ballroom. DeAndre was standing frozen near the catering entrance, his face shining with a thick, terrified layer of sweat. The custom velvet dinner jacket he wore suddenly looked like a cheap, poorly fitted costume. "The startup you were pitched does not exist," I declared, my voice rising in volume, demanding absolute attention from every single billionaire and venture capitalist in the room. "It is a shell corporation. It is an elaborate, sophisticated, designed exclusively to drain your venture capital funds and disappear into offshore accounts." A loud collective gasp erupted from the center of the room. Several prominent investors' men who had just been clinking champagne flutes with DeAndre 20 minutes ago abruptly dropped their glasses. The crystal shattered against the marble floor, but nobody moved to clean it up. They stared up at the massive screens, recognizing the names of the holding companies they had been negotiating with. I pressed the remote again. The screens transitioned to a brutal, simplified infographic. It showed a massive red deficit charting straight down into oblivion. The man, my sister, married the man my mother just praised as a financial genius, is currently hiding a $5 million deficit, I explained, articulating every single syllable with ruthless clarity. He has been using early investor capital to fund the lavish lifestyle you see on display here tonight. The designer gowns, the luxury cars, the proposed $2 million estate in Buckhead. It is all paid for by stolen money. He is drowning in debt, and he has been borrowing capital from extremely violent, aggressive loan sharks operating out of Miami to keep this counterfeit empire afloat. The murmurs in the ballroom escalated into full-blown panicked shouts. High society decorum completely evaporated. Men in expensive tuxedos began pulling out their phones frantically, dialing their wealth managers and legal teams to freeze their assets. Women in designer dresses backed away from Vivian, as if she were carrying a highly contagious lethal disease. The prestigious, untouchable image my mother had spent decades curating was entirely incinerated in less than 3 minutes. DeAndre realized the absolute finality of his situation. The charismatic, smooth-talking tech entrepreneur completely vanished, replaced entirely by a desperate, panicked street grifter. He looked at the massive screens displaying his federal crimes, then looked at the furious wealthy investors pulling out their phones to call their attorneys. He knew he was trapped. He did not try to defend himself. He did not try to offer an explanation or a smooth lie. He simply turned around and bolted. He lunged toward the heavy service doors leading to the hotel kitchens, his polished leather shoes slipping frantically on the marble floor. He shoved a waiter out of his way, sending a tray of expensive champagne crashing to the ground. He was a cornered animal operating on pure, unadulterated adrenaline, desperate to escape the grand ballroom before the full weight of the law crashed down upon his shoulders. But Elias Thorne had anticipated every single variable. As DeAndre reached out to shove the heavy service doors open, the doors swung inward with brutal, terrifying force. 4 men wearing dark tactical suits stepped directly into the threshold, completely blocking the exit. These were not hotel security guards. They were Elias's private military contractors, and they moved with the synchronized, immovable precision of a concrete wall. DeAndre slammed hard into the chest of the lead guard, bouncing off the man's solid frame like a fragile rag doll. He stumbled backward, panting heavily, his eyes darting frantically around the room, desperately searching for another way out. There were no other ways out. Every single door in the grand ballroom was sealed. Then the true authorities arrived. Pushing past Elias's security detail, 6 men and women wearing standard-issue windbreakers stepped into the opulent ballroom. The bold yellow letters printed across their jackets read FBI. Elias's elite legal team had tipped off the federal authorities hours ago, handing over the heavily encrypted dossier containing the absolute proof of DeAndre's multi-million-dollar wire fraud and money laundering operations. The federal agents had been waiting patiently in the hotel loading dock, sipping coffee, just waiting for my presentation to serve as the ultimate public confession. The lead FBI agent, a tall, no-nonsense woman with a severe expression, marched directly toward DeAndre. She did not hesitate. She did not offer him a polite greeting. She grabbed his arm, twisting it forcefully behind his back, and slammed him face first against the nearest marble pillar. "DeAndre, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, money laundering, and racketeering. the agent announced, her voice booming over the chaotic noise of the terrified crowd. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The sharp, metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs, ratcheting securely around DeAndre's wrists, echoed through the grand ballroom. It was the most beautiful, satisfying sound I had ever heard in my entire life. DeAndre struggled weakly against the cold marble, but the federal agents held him firmly in place. His custom velvet jacket was bunched up around his neck, his expensive watch catching the harsh light of the chandeliers as his hands were bound behind his back. The wealthy investors he had tried to scam stood just a few feet away, watching his humiliating downfall with expressions of pure, unadulterated vengeance. He had tried to steal their millions, and now he was going to spend the next decade of his life in a federal penitentiary. From the center of the ballroom, a piercing, hysterical scream shattered the air. It was Vivian. My mother pushed her way through the paralyzed crowd, her silver-beaded gown sparkling wildly as she ran toward the back of the room. Her carefully styled hair was coming undone, falling in frantic, messy strands across her panicked face. She reached her hands out toward the federal agents, her voice cracking with sheer disbelieving horror. "No, you cannot do this!" Vivian shrieked, her lungs straining with the effort. "He is a prominent businessman. You are making a mistake. This is a private party. Get your hands off my son-in-law right now. We belong to the country club. You cannot treat us like this." The lead FBI agent turned her head, giving Vivian a look of absolute chilling indifference. "Ma'am, step back immediately, or you will be arrested for interfering with a federal investigation." The agent warned, her hand resting casually on her utility belt. Vivian froze, her expensive high heels rooted to the marble floor. She stared at the steel handcuffs cutting into DeAndre's wrists, the reality of the situation finally piercing her thick, delusional armor of high society privilege. Her golden son-in-law, the man she had elevated above her own flesh and blood, the man she had willingly sacrificed my life to protect, was nothing but a cheap, common criminal being hauled away by the federal government. The agents pulled DeAndre away from the marble pillar, marching him aggressively toward the service doors. The crowd parted instantly, refusing to even brush against his clothing. DeAndre kept his head down, staring at the floor, completely stripped of his arrogant bravado. He was a broken, pathetic fraud, and the entire black corporate elite of Atlanta was watching his spectacular, inescapable ruin. I stood on the main stage, the heavy silver microphone still gripped tightly in my hand. I looked down at Vivian. She was trembling violently, her chest heaving as she watched the service doors swing shut behind the federal agents. Her prized asset was gone. Her leverage was gone. The fake empire she had built on the foundation of my stolen identity was actively crumbling into dust. But the execution was not over. DeAndre was just the first target, the appetizer before the main course. I still had the absolute, undeniable proof of my family's identity theft, and Simone was still standing frozen just a few feet away from me, wearing a ruby-red dress paid for by my extracted blood. I turned my head, locking my eyes directly onto my terrified sister. I offered her a slow, freezing smile. The crowd slowly turned their attention back to the main stage. The high society guests realized that the show was far from finished. They stared up at me, their eyes wide with morbid, captive fascination. I raised the microphone back to my lips, ready to deliver the next devastating blow. The massive projection screens behind me flickered again, shifting from DeAndre's corporate fraud to a new, highly classified set of documents. The financial guillotine was raised high into the air, and it was time to let the blade drop directly onto the neck of the golden child. The absolute, inescapable destruction of their toxic legacy was proceeding with flawless, immaculate precision, and I was going to enjoy every single second of their total annihilation. Simone stared up at the massive projection screens, her chest heaving, as the crisp, high-definition displays transitioned from her husband's federal indictments to a complex web of corporate financial transfers. The logo of her prestigious public relations firm flashed in bright, unforgiving colors, directly linked by thick red lines to the offshore accounts DeAndre had used to launder his stolen venture capital. The reality of her exposure hit her like a physical blow. The golden child, who had spent her entire life skating by on stolen privilege, and my exhausted labor suddenly realized she was standing squarely on the tracks of an oncoming freight train. "I did not know anything!" Simone shrieked, her voice cracking as she backed away from me. She waved her arms frantically toward the audience, her ruby red gown swishing erratically. I swear I had no idea what he was doing. DeAndre handled all the finances. I am a victim here. He lied to me. He used my company without my permission. You have to believe me. She was lying. Simone had personally authorized every single transfer that washed DeAndre's illicit funds through her public relations firm's payroll accounts, skimming a hefty 20% off the top to fund her designer wardrobe and luxury vacations. Before I could verbally dissect her pathetic defense, Elias Thorne stepped up to the edge of the stage. He moved with that same terrifying apex predator calmness that commanded the absolute submission of everyone in the room. He climbed the short flight of carpeted stairs, his dark eyes fixed entirely on my trembling sister. I gladly handed him the heavy silver microphone. Elias looked out at the sea of terrified corporate executives and wealthy investors, then turned his lethal gaze directly onto Simone. "Your public relations firm was built on a foundation of gross negligence and financial complicity," Elias announced, his deep baritone echoing off the crystal chandeliers. "As of 4 o'clock this afternoon, my conglomerate successfully executed a hostile takeover of your parent company. We now own a controlling interest in your firm. And as the new majority shareholder, I have spent the last 2 hours reviewing the catastrophic operational failures that allowed your husband to launder stolen capital through our newly acquired payroll systems." Simone stopped breathing. Her eyes bulged as the phantom billionaire laid out the absolute termination of her entire professional existence. "Therefore," Elias continued, his voice devoid of any mercy, "your promotion to Public Relations Director is officially nullified effective immediately. Furthermore, your employment is permanently terminated for direct complicity in federal financial fraud. My legal team has already forwarded your authorized signature logs to the federal agents waiting outside. You are completely finished in the corporate world, Simone. Do not attempt to clear out your desk. Hotel security will escort you off these premises the moment we conclude our business here." Simone collapsed onto her knees. The beautiful, arrogant sister who had mocked me for being a lonely corporate drone was now a disgraced, unemployed fraudster facing impending federal indictment. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably as the elite crowd she had desperately tried to impress watched her spectacular ruin with undisguised contempt. I took the microphone back from Elias, feeling a surge of electric triumph. But the execution was not over. The final, most destructive blow was reserved exclusively for the matriarch who had engineered this entire toxic nightmare. Vivian had watched her golden son-in-law get hauled away in handcuffs. She had just watched her golden daughter get fired and publicly disgraced by a billionaire. The carefully curated, pristine high society image she had spent 30 years building was completely, irreversibly reduced to ashes. The realization shattered whatever fragile grip she still had on her sanity. "You ruined everything," Vivian screamed, her voice a raw, hysterical shriek that tore through the grand ballroom. She abandoned all pretense of wealthy sophistication. Her silver-beaded gown caught the stage lights as she charged toward the carpeted stairs. Her face was contorted into an ugly, hateful mask of pure rage. She rushed up the steps, raising her right hand high into the air, fully intending to strike me across the face in front of hundreds of people. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I stood my ground, my chin held high, watching her launch herself at me with pathetic desperation. Vivian's hand never reached my face. Before she could even cross the threshold of the stage, Elias's head of security materialized from the shadows. The towering man moved with terrifying speed, stepping directly into Vivian's path. He caught her raised wrist mid-swing, his massive hand wrapping around her forearm like a steel vise. He did not hurt her, but he completely immobilized her in an instant. Vivian gasped in shock, struggling frantically against the guard's iron grip, but she was entirely powerless. "Get your hands off me!" Vivian shrieked, kicking wildly at the security guard. "I am her mother. I brought her into this world. I have the right to discipline my ungrateful, wicked child." I looked down at the woman struggling against the security guard, feeling absolutely nothing but cold, clinical disgust. You stopped being my mother the moment you stole my identity, I declared into the microphone, my voice echoing like thunder across the silent ballroom. I pressed the button on my wireless remote. The massive screens shifted one final time. The offshore accounts vanished, replaced by undeniable high-definition copies of fraudulent loan applications, maxed-out credit card statements, and secondary mortgage agreements. Highlighted in bright red across every single document was my social security number, paired directly with Vivian and Jerome's digital signatures and routing details. For the past 7 years, I explained to the captivated audience of Atlanta's elite. My parents have been systematically stealing my identity. They used my immaculate credit profile to secure hundreds of thousands of dollars in illicit loans. They funded Simone's lavish lifestyle. They bought DeAndre's imported cars. They operated as common identity thieves, using their own daughter as a human shield for their financial crimes. I pointed directly at Jerome, who was cowering near the catering doors, trying desperately to blend into the shadows. My father stood by and authorized every single fraudulent application I announced, ensuring the entire room recognized his absolute cowardice. Vivian stopped struggling against the security guard. She stared up at the massive screens, her chest heaving as her darkest, most deeply buried secrets were broadcast in brilliant high definition. But identity theft is not even the most repulsive thing you did, Vivian, I said softly, my voice carrying a lethal quiet intensity that demanded total silence from the crowd. You told everyone in this room that I was locked away in a psychiatric clinic because I was struggling with my mental health. You played the victim. Let us show your friends exactly where I was 2 days ago, and exactly what kind of mother you truly are. I pressed the remote one last time. The screens faded to black, displaying a single pulsating audio waveform. I had paid a hefty sum to the hospital's private security firm to acquire the lobby surveillance footage from the morning of my surgery. The audio quality was pristine. Vivian's shrill, unmistakable voice blasted through the massive concert speakers of the grand ballroom. I do not care if she just had surgery, the recorded. Vivian screamed, her voice echoing violently off the crystal chandeliers. She is young, she can sleep it off. Pull those intravenous lines out of her arms right now. I need her at the bank by 8 o'clock. If she does not sign those guarantor papers for Simone's mansion, I am going to sue this hospital for holding her hostage. Wake her up. The recording clicked off, leaving a deafening, horrifying silence in its wake. The wealthy socialites, the prominent politicians, and the powerful investors in the audience stared at Vivian with expressions of pure, unfiltered revulsion. Women who had been sipping champagne with her just an hour ago now looked at her as if she were a literal monster. The absolute, unvarnished truth of her profound cruelty was exposed for the entire world to judge. She had tried to drag her freshly operated daughter out of an intensive care unit to sign a fraudulent mortgage. There was no coming back from that level of public social annihilation. I reached into the hidden pocket of my emerald silk gown. I pulled out a thick legal envelope sealed with a red wax stamp. I tossed it effortlessly down the stairs. The heavy envelope landed squarely on Vivian's lap with a definitive thud. That is a formal lawsuit for identity theft, wire fraud, and severe emotional distress, I announced coldly, looking straight down into her panicked eyes. My dedicated legal team has already officially filed it with the federal court system. But that is not the only document hidden inside that envelope. The second document, I continued, my voice echoing with absolute finality, is a formal notice of immediate foreclosure. Elias's bank recently acquired the mortgage on your beautiful suburban home. Since you used stolen funds to pay your recent installments, you are in default. You have exactly 24 hours to vacate the premises before the locks are changed entirely. Vivian dropped heavily to her knees, clutching the thick envelope against her chest. She loudly wailed, a jagged, broken sound that completely stripped away the last remnants of her high society illusion. The elite crowd watched in sheer disgust as the matriarch of the family crumbled into a pathetic, weeping mess on the cold marble floor today. Jerome finally emerged from the dark shadows. He rushed toward the stage, his hands clasped together in a desperate, cowardly plea. "Tessa, please," he begged, his voice trembling with pathetic fear. "We are your parents. We made terrible mistakes, but we can fix this. Do not throw us out onto the street. Show us some mercy now. You had no mercy when you left me to die, I replied coldly, looking down at the man who enabled my abuse for 3 decades. Two uniformed local police officers coordinating with the federal agents outside stepped into the grand ballroom. They approached Vivian, demanding she stand up to answer questions regarding the identity theft fraud charges. The entire high society party was in absolute, devastating ruins. The extravagant floral arrangements and crystal champagne flutes now served as the backdrop for a highly spectacular, inescapable, humiliating downfall. I handed the heavy silver microphone back to the bewildered sound technician standing near the edge of the stage. I did not offer my family another glance. I turned my back on their desperate pleas and walked gracefully down the carpeted stairs. Elias Thorne was patiently waiting for me at the bottom. He offered his arm, a triumphant smirk playing on his lips. I slipped my hand through the crook of his elbow, and together we walked out of the grand ballroom. We left them trapped in a self-made hell of flashing police lights, federal indictments, and utter social eradication. The heavy mahogany doors swung shut behind us, closing the darkest chapter of my life forever. 6 months later, the world looked entirely different. My physical wounds had completely healed, leaving only a faint silver scar across my abdomen as a permanent reminder of the ultimate betrayal. I was no longer a mid-level risk analyst working grueling 90-hour weeks to fund the fraudulent lifestyle of a toxic family. I had officially accepted a highly lucrative position as a senior partner at Thorne Ventures. Elias and I had become an unstoppable force in the corporate financial sector. We spent our days dismantling corrupt enterprises and building a massive, untouchable empire of our own. The corner office with the panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline finally belonged to me, earned through my own strategic brilliance. The poetic justice delivered to my former family was absolute and unwavering. Simone lost everything. Stripped of her corporate title and entirely blacklisted from the public relations industry, she was forced to take a minimum wage retail job at a local discount mall. She spends her days folding cheap clothes, drowning in a massive mountain of legal debt from the civil lawsuits I successfully filed against her. There are no more designer gowns or flashy promotion parties in her future. DeAndre's fake tech empire collapsed overnight. The federal prosecutors did not offer him a lenient plea deal. He was found guilty on multiple counts of wire fraud, money laundering, and racketeering. He is currently serving a mandatory 10-year sentence in a maximum security federal penitentiary, completely stripped of his custom velvet suits and arrogant bravado. Vivian and Jerome faced the harshest reality of all. After Elias's bank foreclosed on their pristine suburban estate, they were permanently exiled from the wealthy social circles they had sacrificed my life to impress. The country club revoked their membership, and their high society friends completely abandoned them. They now live in a cramped, run-down apartment on the outskirts of the city. Their credit is permanently destroyed due to the massive restitution they were court-ordered to pay me for years of identity theft. They are entirely invisible now, suffering in the exact same cold isolation they had callously forced upon me for over 3 decades. I now sit on the sprawling glass balcony of my new luxury penthouse, sipping a glass of vintage red wine. The cool evening breeze sweeps across the magnificent Atlanta skyline, carrying with it the undeniable scent of absolute freedom. I look down at the glittering city below, completely unburdened by the heavy toxic obligations that once chained me to the ground. I built this empire with my own brilliant mind, and I will fiercely protect my peace at all costs. Blood does not automatically make someone family. Sometimes the people who share your DNA are simply highly skilled parasites disguised as relatives. They will drain your resources, sabotage your mental health, and literally leave you to die on a cold hospital bed if it serves their selfish agendas. You owe them absolutely nothing. You do not owe loyalty to anyone who treats your existence as a convenient financial instrument. Cutting off a toxic bloodline is not an act of cruelty, it is an act of profound self-preservation. You have the absolute right to burn their bridges, walk away from their manipulation, and build a spectacular kingdom entirely of your own. If you have ever had to sever ties with a manipulative family to protect your own life, I truly want to hear your story today. Please share your personal experiences in the comments section below. Let us build a strong community of survivors who refuse to be victims. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more empowering stories, and always remember to ruthlessly protect your own inner peace.